Education monthly meeting on Wednesday, June 18th. And we will start off with a roll call. Suzanne, you're leading the meeting today, right?
Yes, I am.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Brian Campion.
Here.
Mohammed Job.
Here.
Gray Farron.
I'm here.
Caleb Greenwood.
Here. Morning, everybody.
Lyle Jepson.
Here.
Tammy Colby.
Good morning, everyone.
Tom Levitt. Cynthia Stewart. Rich Werner. Secretary Saunders.
Hi, I'm here.
And Chair Samuelson.
Here, thank you very much. All right, before we get started, are there any amendments to the agenda? Hearing none, I will turn it to public to be heard. If there are any members of the public who wish to be heard, you can raise your hand using the hand icon on the Teams platform or *5 if you're calling in. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone yet. I will leave this agenda item open and move on to our next agenda items, and I'll just circle back. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of our May 21st, 2025 meeting?
I'll move to approve the minutes of the May meeting as submitted.
Thank you, Rich. Is there a
I'll
second?
second that. I'll second that.
Thank you, Mohammed. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving our minutes from our May 21st, 2025 meeting, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Board announcements. I don't know if anyone has any announcements that they'd like to make. The only announcement I have is I did connect with the governor's office just to request an update on our new student member. And my understanding is that they will be conducting interviews next week. So we are in good shape to have a member for our July meeting. And as I've done with new members, I will plan to meet with that new member. And Caleb, I will reach out to you as our senior student just to do the orientation, just to get whoever the person is ready for our July meeting. All right. Any other announcements? All right. Student report. Caleb will start, no, actually, Gray, we'll start with you.
Well, I don't have much to report about because I haven't even been in school because I graduated, and that was like a week and a half ago. I graduated, which was cool, and then I had my Eagle ceremony. I officially became an Eagle Scout, which was also exciting for me, and did all the things that come with both of those. And since then, I've been done with school. For everybody else, the last day of school was yesterday. We had a half day on Tuesday, which I think was just fun activities and things because there's only so much you can do on a final half day Tuesday. But yeah, I don't have a lot of reports about things happening in school because I haven't been there. But when I was there, I mean, we did like senior awards night and stuff like that, and final athletics awards and anything that ended for athletic seasons. And then all our underclassmen do underclassmen awards, which is similar. And like for each subject, they'll get things like, you know, outstanding achievement for 10th graders in science and things like that for all the different subject areas and all the different grades. And they have a whole assembly to give out those underclassmen awards. And that was last week. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything.
Great. And looking forward just through the rest of your summer, you may have told us, but do you have plans for the summer? And then when do you head off to Vassar?
I have some plans for the summer. A lot of them are just working. I'll continue to lifeguard the pool. And then early in August, I'll leave for Vassar. Because I have to leave a little bit early if I want to do cross country to be there for that whole process. So that would be like second week of August.
That's great.
Oh.
Yeah, and then I'm sure your sister's going to have to acclimate to being an only child.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, she's got another 3 years. So
Yeah. All right. Any questions or comments for Gray?
Congratulations.
thank you.
All righty. Well, Caleb, I will turn it over to you.
All right. So our last day, as I'm not a senior, I believe was, hold on, let me look at the calendar really quick. I think it was, hold on, I need to expand it. I believe it was the 13th, so last Friday. And then for seniors, it was, I think, a couple days before that, maybe even the Friday before. They got done pretty early. But in late May, we also had our award ceremony. We call it the Night of Excellence, basically. And it's a mix of basically any teacher is able to give awards. So some of them have like mid-level classes and then they get awards, but then there's also awards specifically for AP classes and things like that. So like the math department, there's basically only one award and you have to get, I think it's like a 3.5 in every single math you've taken, and you have to take at least one AP math or something like that. So like there's awards like that, but then there's ones, so at our school we have those folio tasks that are required to graduate. They're basically intended to help develop like critical thinking skills, teamwork skills, things like that. So some teachers give awards for like people who did excellent on those type of things. And we also have athletic awards. But then at the very end, there's also arts awards as well, like theater, music, things like that. But then at the very end, our school very kindly gives out 3 $5,000 scholarships and 1 $1,000 scholarship to outgoing seniors. So that's a really cool thing. But we obviously don't have much going on now that the school year's over. But yeah, that was about what's happened in the past couple weeks.
So a couple questions. How many seniors do you have in your class, roughly?
My class is right around 90 to 100.
Okay. And where does the money come from?
It's from alumni that sponsor it.
Okay. It's very generous.
Yeah.
And what are your
And
plans?
remind us, what school? What
Lake
school do you go to?
Region. Lake Region.
Lake Region. Yeah.
Yeah.
Caleb, what are your plans for the summer?
I'm gonna try to work a whole lot. And then also I'm gonna try to get down to DC for a couple college tours, meet up with some friends that live down there.
Terrific. Any questions or comments for Caleb? All right, Caleb, I will say if you're interested in American University, my one of my kids just graduated from there and she has taken people on tour. She did not connect with Gray. Unfortunately, we tried, but if you're interested in American and would like to have a personalized tour, you can connect with me offline.
All right.
All right. All right. If there's nothing else, I'm going to circle back again to public comment. Still not seeing anybody. Well, we will have time again at the end of our meeting today, so I'm going to close public comment for now. And this takes us to our legislative wrap-up, and we have Zoe, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, good morning. So There may be some additional updates that we can provide. What you'll see in our overview today is that there are certain bills that are still pending the governor's action. So we can certainly follow up at a subsequent board meeting. Today, we did put together a presentation to outline the components of the education-related bills. In this presentation, we've also highlighted the responsibilities of the board to pursue rulemaking and also the deliverables required by the agency. So with that, I will turn it over to Torin Ballard to walk through the presentation.
To walk through with. Everything wrapped up very recently, and we didn't know if we actually have some finalized bills to talk about, so I'm happy to say that we do. We'll be talking about 3 bills today. It'll be House Bill 209, which is about nasal epinephrine, I think I'm pronouncing that right. And then we'll also go over the miscellaneous ed bill, and then finally education transformation as well. So what we'll do, I think we'll start off with House Bill 209. I think Lindsay's going to walk us through that, and then the miscellaneous education bill, and then we'll wrap up talking about education transformation. I think we only have maybe about 30 minutes in the schedule today. We will try to stay within that range. However, if you have additional questions, if you want us to go into additional detail on anything, feel free to ask any questions. And also, feel free to invite us back to talk more about any of these subjects again next month as well. So I think I will kick it off to Lindsay at the moment. I believe she has some slides to walk us through this. And if not, I will pull up my slides.
Just wait for a moment for you to be able to share your screen.
Good morning, everyone. Just getting myself situated over here. All right.
We can see your screen.
Great.
I think we just lost your screen.
You just lost your screen, yes.
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
All right.
Oh,
Sorry,
we just
folks.
lost it again.
Having a little screen sharing issue this morning.
Into the details of all these bills. Our slides are relatively detailed about all the various provisions, especially in 480 and in 454. And so if there are certain subjects that you would like us to focus on, that you have more of an interest in, we're happy to kind of jump ahead to those subjects. And if there's a subject that comes up that you're not as interested in, we're happy to kind of skip over that for now for the sake of time. But unless we hear otherwise, we'll plan to just go through our slide deck as prepared.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I appreciate the fact that you've highlighted for each of these 3 buckets of bills what the state board responsibilities are. I mean, there's been a flurry of activity in the last couple of weeks, and I think I had decided not to have more than a legislative update, but I think this will be a good introduction, and then the board can really dig into this at our, beginning with our July meeting. So I appreciate the overview.
Yeah, so we'll try to keep it relatively light today in that case.
All right. I cannot see you all, so if I can just get a quick thumbs up that you can now officially see the slides.
Yes,
We can see the slide.
Awesome. All right. So as Torin noted, we are just going to do high-level overview of the major education bills. I'm going to try and move through this efficiently so we can save time for questions at the end. So kicking us off, we have H209, which is now very recently Act 53. And this deals with nasal epinephrine in schools. And this was signed into law by the governor June 11th. So this was our first education bill signed into law this session. It's a relatively short bill. There's only 2 sections. It specifically allows for the expanded access to emergency epinephrine in multiple forms, not just auto injector, which is kind of the traditional form that folks might think of. It specifically calls out the use of nasal epinephrine, but it also keeps the language flexible and open in the event that there are new forms of epinephrine that become available in future years. And this minor adjustment really is just meant to keep up with current trends and best practices in healthcare and ensure that students have access to epinephrine in the event of a medical emergency or allergy event. And this legislation takes effect on July 1, so relatively soon. And then moving into H480, there are 19 sections of this bill. So again, I'm going to try and move through these relatively quickly. This is hot off the press, passed out of the legislature Monday night, but we are still awaiting action from the governor. So none of these provisions are law quite just yet. Sections 1 and 2 relate to behavioral threat assessment teams, and these teams were established in Act 29 of 2023, which was the big school safety bill. And this language is really meant to help clarify as implementation gets underway. We've gotten some feedback from the field on ways we can clarify this language. And so it's meant to align data reporting and collection for teams that existed pre-Act 29, and as well as teams that are being stood up and will be stood up very shortly pursuant to Act 29. So everyone will be reporting data and in a robust way and at the same time. It also has an extension, a deadline extension for the creation of emergency operations plans. That work is well underway in the field, but this extension just gives folks a bit of wiggle room to allow them to tie up that work. And there's also some language that clarifies the roles and responsibilities of school boards and superintendents related to the creation of policies and procedures. Section 3 relates to closed post-secondary institutions in Vermont. So this is very straightforward. It just removes the names of closed colleges in Title 16, and this is really meant as a consumer protection measure. We've seen that there are online actors that are standing up what's referred to as diploma mills and using the names of these closed institutions for fraudulent online activity. So this is meant to clean up that language. This section is related to child nutrition public bids. Previously, the threshold for non-food purchases, so think, ovens, microwaves, ice machines, things you might find in a school cafeteria, that threshold was kept lower than the threshold for other school purchases, which is at $40,000. And so this section clarifies that discrepancy and raises the threshold. And this is really intended to reduce confusion and administrative burden and ensures that all of those purchases are following the same state requirements as well as the other federal requirements that they have to face. This next section is related to virtual learning. This is section 5, and this is adding a section to the flexible pathways section of Title 16, and is meant to clarify that virtual learning is a flexible pathway available to students. We've seen uneven use of virtual learning around the state, and a lot of that is due to the fact that it was not clearly outlined in statute, specifically that a school would be able to maintain their average daily membership of a student participating in virtual learning. So again, this is really meant to kind of tighten up that language to ensure that folks around the state are know that this is an option available to students. Section 6 is related to, I believe it's Act 168 8 of last year, which created BOCES, or Boards of Cooperative Education Services. And so this moves the startup grant available to a BOCES. It makes it available to folks during the exploratory phase. So districts are able to apply for and receive that $10,000 startup grant before the BOCES is formed, and they're able to use that money to kind of get together and determine whether or not a BOCES would be viable in their region. Again, this was passed into law last session, but we've noted some hesitancy around the state to kind of pull these BOCES together, oftentimes with concern around the costs that might be incurred, again, in that kind of exploratory phase. So this is meant to get that money to folks up front so they can pursue this. This section, we are now in section 8, related to military post-secondary opportunities, again, in the flexible pathways statute. And this requires that when students in grades, I believe it's 7 through 12, are engaging in career development and post-secondary planning, that military-related opportunities are included in the resources are provided, and that they are aware that that is an option to them. The next section, which I'm sure is of interest to you all, amends the secretary search process to be a bit more prescriptive. It outlines that the governor must initiate a search process no later than 30 days after a vacancy becomes available, and the state board must begin the search process no later than 60 days after the governor initiates that search. Supplemental reading instruction. We are now in section 10. And again, this is from legislation that was passed last year, Act 139. And this is intended to clarify the section related to supplemental reading instruction for struggling readers. And there was some confusion around who exactly this section applied to. So this language is meant to clarify that it is all students K through 12 who are struggling readers rather than just K through 3. And importantly, this language does not change the entirety of Act 139. Act 139 is still intended to be legislation aimed at students in K through 3, young readers, but this section specifically is meant to make sure we are catching adolescent struggling readers and providing them with the supplemental reading instruction that they need. Cardiac emergency response plans, section 11. And so again, back to Act 29 that we touched on earlier, this section requires that all schools in their emergency operations plan include a provision for acute cardiac events, as well as athletic emergency action plans. And these should be integrated into those emergency operations plans for the 2026-27 school year. And this is really just to ensure that every school around the state is well equipped and trained to respond to any cardiac event that might happen on a school campus. Energy performance contracting. This amends some current law related to school construction and extends the payback timeline from 10 to 20 years for projects like boilers and roofs and windows. And these changes are intended to allow folks to hopefully reap the benefits of an energy efficient investment in a school. And so that longer payback time is hopefully going to be reflective of the actual lifespan of a school infrastructure project. And this change aligns with state standards that exist within the buildings and general services standards already. School library selection, again, this is a tweak made to Act 150 of 2024, which was some legislation that touched upon school library material selection. And so again, this was just a clarification that superintendent's role is to determine the procedures and school boards establish policy. So a very minor tweak there. This section, the moratorium on independent schools, this adjusts the moratorium to allow for therapeutic schools specifically that are looking to convert their status to a nonprofit, to allow them to go through that process without triggering the process to having to reapply and then running into the moratorium. So this was specifically brought about by the Mill School in Winooski, who I believe is going through the process of converting to a nonprofit. Section 17, I think this is probably people's choice, of most interest in this bill this session. This is the statewide cell phone policy. And so this requires the agency with some other stakeholders to establish and adopt a bell-to-bell model policy that prohibits student use of cell phones in schools. And this will go into effect. Schools must adopt a policy but for the 2026-27 school year. And there's a variety of exemptions built into this policy. So students who may need a cell phone due to an IEP or health reason, or students who are experiencing homelessness are exempt, and we are allowing administrators to use their discretion to allow students to use cell phones for academic or co-curricular purposes. And so that model policy, again, will be the floor. And so schools that have already implemented a cell phone policy that is robust and bell-to-bell will likely not need to make any adjustments to those policies. There is another provision in this section of the bill related to social media, and this prohibits direct communication with students via social media platform unless it is a platform that is explicitly approved for by the school. And it also prohibits students from using social media or requiring the use of social media for any school-related activities outside of school hours. And lastly, our last section here is related to CTE attendance zones. This section is current law, is meant to kind of clarify current law that students may enroll in a CTE program outside of their service region if the program that they are hoping to enroll in is not available locally, and it clarifies that CTE centers may provide that transportation for students who live outside the designated service region. And this is really intended to balance those centers that are over-enrolled and help them kind of share students with those centers that might be under-enrolled. So those are the 19 sections of the miscellaneous ed bill, and we will now move into H454, and I will pass it off to Torin.
New bill passed on Monday evening. A lot of changes in the last couple weeks. We've been kind of keeping up with all of them, and so we'll do our best to explain at the moment. There are, I believe, 60 sections of this 155-page bill. We will not be going through all of those sections. These are the major elements of the legislation. There are plenty of relatively minor elements as well. We'll do our best to kind of just go through these major ones here. And like I said, we're happy to come back next month and talk about any of these at length. So let's go ahead and just jump in at this point. Okay, so the big change is that H454 will establish a process for moving to larger and a fewer number of school districts. The bill creates the School District Redistricting Task Force, kind of a mouthful, which will consult with the Commission for the Future of Public Education to propose up to 3 options for new school districts. That's up to 3, not 3 necessarily. There are a lot of considerations in what these new school districts might look like, but I want to highlight a couple of requirements that will be in the statute. One of those is that the average daily membership in the proposed districts will be, to the extent practical, about 4,000 to 8,000 students. So I think if you look at the overall number of students enrolled in Vermont, we're looking at probably 10 to 20 districts, but that could be a little different because of that to the extent practical language in there. Also in statute, one of those recommendations shall consider the use of supervisory unions and supervisory districts, allow for the continuation of a similar tuitioning system as we have now, and then also not separate those geographic areas that contain non-operating school districts. The membership of that task force will be 11 people overall, 5 non-legislative members, primarily superintendents, but also business managers and or a school board member. And then there'll be 6 legislators overall, 3 from each chamber, and then also of different political parties and different school districts as well. Now, the timeline here is that the first meeting will happen by August 1st of this year, which is coming up pretty soon. They will meet, I think, throughout the fall and hold at least 2 public hearings, perhaps more, with the idea that the proposals will be submitted for those proposed maps by December 1st. During the 2026 legislative session, the General Assembly will vote on these proposals and hopefully come up with a plan by the end of that session, because November 27th, there will be a special election for new school boards. And finally, those new districts will be in operation along with the foundation formula July 1st, 2028. So we have about a 3-year runway for this process. The bill also changes somewhat the scope of the Commission for the Future of Public Education. I'm using the acronym CFPE. I've been told that has not really been in use, but I'm going to start it. So the result of the CFPE's work in the statute is changed somewhat to provide recommendations generally for what roles, functions, or decisions should be a function of local control versus at the state level. Now, more specifically, those recommendations shall be for necessary updates to the roles and responsibilities of school boards and the electorate in those districts, a process for communities to have a voice in any decisions around school closures, and then also just a process for monitoring implementation of the law that is public-facing and transparent. There will be a report due on these recommendations by December 1st of this year. I believe the Commission will cease to be at the end of this calendar year. So I think that's in the existing statute at the moment. Class size minimums has been a very big subject being discussed in the debate around this bill. So the bill includes average class size minimums that will be included in education quality standards. And so we're looking at, for grade 1, that's going to be 10 students, 12 for grades 2 to 5, 15 students for grades 6 to 8, 18 students for grades 9 to 12. There are a number of exceptions for the class size minimums: pre-K and kindergarten, CTE, flexible pathways, terminal courses, AP courses, driver's education, and also for geographic isolation. There will be a waiver that will be needed and will need to be approved in order to get the waiver for geographic isolation, but that is written into the statute. If a school district does not abide by class size minimums for over 3 consecutive years, the secretary may, not shall, may recommend to the state board to take corrective action. Those minimums are not met. The state board, you all, will be initiating the rulemaking for this by August 1st of next year. And that will include what the definition of geographic isolation will be, as well as what rules to require approved independent schools to comply with those minimums. And at the end of this presentation, we will go through all of the dates by which all of these various rules and reports will be due. So no need to be kind of keeping track and writing those down throughout the presentation. We have those all in order at the end. Okay, graduation requirements. So under H454, the agency will recommend standards for statewide graduation requirements by January 1st of 26, so the beginning of the next calendar year. You all will adopt standards for those graduation requirements by July 1st of 2027, so you have a little bit of time to figure that out. Those graduation requirements will take effect beginning in the 2027 to 2028 school year, and they shall apply first for the graduating class of 2031. Related to graduation requirements, the Secretary will also publish a statewide calendar, which will go into effect beginning in the 28-29 school year. There is a lot of new statute related to independent schools in this. I think probably most important, there'll be new criteria for approved independent schools to receive public tuition money in Vermont. First of all, those schools will need to be located physically in Vermont. They'll need to be located in a school district or a supervisory union that does not operate a public school for at least some grades as of July 1st of last year. Now, at least 25% of enrolled students in an approved school will need to be district or would have had to be district funded in the 23-24 school year. This number was kind of subject to debate. Eventually, they came up with 25% for this. And then finally, an approved independent school will need to comply with those minimum class size requirements, although they will have an option to get a waiver for geographic isolation in the same way that a public school would be able to access that waiver. If there's students who are currently paying tuition, or districts who are currently paying tuition for students, they will continue to do so until those students graduate. So they have been grandfathered into the law there. Another provision that got added on kind of near the end of the conference process was that for any receiving school, and so this applies to independent schools, but also public schools that are receiving students from elsewhere. So the tuition will be based on the new funding formula. However, those receiving schools may charge up to an additional 5% for each high school student attending that school. There are a few caveats here. This will be pending approval by the state board, as well as the electorate of every school that is sending at least one student to that receiving district. So there's a lot of things that will need to happen before this goes into place, but the idea is that receiving schools, either independent or public, will be able to charge an additional 5% for students in grades 9 through 12. There's a lot of language about school construction. So the agency will be implementing the state aid for school construction program, which will include a lot of steps, but primarily reviewing applications for aid, doing rulemaking related to this aid, and then also just dispersing awards. So the idea behind state aid for school construction is that schools, if they are either building a new building or doing substantial repairs, would be if they can apply for a base award that would cover 20% of eligible debt service cost. They also would have the opportunity to apply for an additional 20% based on kind of bonus incentives there. And the specific criteria for that will be determined in future rulemaking. Those awards will be based on a number of statutory considerations and also a point prioritization methodology that will be determined in rulemaking by the agency. And I'll just note that rulemaking for related to school construction will be shifting from the state board to the agency. And just a few more notes on related to school construction. H454 creates the State Aid for School Construction Advisory Board, which will be advising the agency on implementation of this program, including just determining the priority of applications for aid. There will be 8 members of the advisory board, the state treasurer, commissioner of the buildings and general services, the executive director of the Vermont bond banks, and also the chair of the state board as well. And then there will be additionally 4 members who will have 4-year terms appointed by the Speaker of the House and the Senate Committee on Committees. There'll be some slight changes to the makeup of the state board. So everybody who is currently serving will still finish out their terms, but the Speaker of the House and the Committee on Committees will each appoint, so the next 2 vacancies that will arise, I believe it'll be the Speaker of the House will appoint the next vacancy, the Committee on Committees will appoint somebody for the next vacancy after that. The governor will still retain the rest of his ability to appoint people for those seats. But first, it'll be Speaker of the House and Committee on Committees will get the next 2 vacant seats. But like I said, current members, you all will serve for the duration of the rest of your term. I think I see a hand up.
So those vacancies, does that include student positions, or will student positions still be appointed by the governor?
The student positions will still be appointed by the governor. These are only for the non-student positions on there. Thanks for the clarifying question. Yeah, of course. Now, one of the biggest aspects of 454 is, of course, the move to a foundation formula. So there's a lot that kind of still needs to happen before this gets set in stone, but the idea is that the base amount will be just over $15,000. There will be a series of weighted funding of different weights to apply weighted funding. Those are all listed here. I'll note that the pre-K will be the current weight that is currently in statute. I think there was a few different numbers that were being discussed there. The agency and JFO will recommend updates to both the base and the weights every 5 years, and that will be starting on January 1st of the coming year. So every 5 years, there will be kind of potential updates to this that the legislature will then act on. JFO will contract with a consultant with expertise in Vermont to recommend some of those updates, including the bill specifically says to consider a potential high school weight. And that report will be, or that'll need to happen by December 1st of next year. And then I'll also note that there is, so you have the base amount, you have the weighted funding, that'll equal the education opportunity payment. However, voters in all of the new districts, once those go into place, will have the opportunity to approve up to 10% over the educational opportunity payment. And that right now in statute, that only applies to fiscal years 2029 to 2033. So in, well, actually up to, excuse me, until 2037. So it'll be up to 10% over the EOP in 29 through 33. Then every year after that, that'll decrease by 1 percentage point. So in fiscal year 2034, you can only spend up to 9% over the EOP. And that'll keep happening until fiscal year 37, at which point I think it's 5% over the EOP. And there is nothing in statute that specifies what will happen in 2038. Presumably, I think you won't. Yeah, exactly. Okay, and so that is the foundation formula. There's a lot else going on there, but that's kind of a very basic explanation of that. Now, this is the section where we're going to go over just the overall. Another slide on deliverables for us at the agency. I won't go through each of these, but you can kind of see a chronological list of the different reports and rules that will need to be amended. Let's see if there's any of these I should probably highlight at the moment. I think one important one on here is that by December 1st of next year, every single rule under the purview of the state board to kind of determine whether these rules are necessary, whether any of them need updates, or whether any new rules are needed. Happy to forward this specific slide to you. This is obviously going to be important for the next couple of years, will be the roadmap for much of our work. And here's a similar slide for the agency. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff on here. We will be staying very busy in the next couple of years, and we are very excited to be starting all of this work. And then I think we have one more slide with a number of deliverables from other commissions, offices, etc. As you can see from these final 3 slides here, the work has really only begun at this point. H454 is a great starting point, but there is a lot of work to be done, and we're excited to start it. So I think at this point, if there's any questions on any of these slides, any of these subjects, we're happy to field those. And as I said earlier, we're also happy to come back next month to talk about any of this in more depth as well.
Lindsay and Torrin, thank you both so much, and Zoe, for putting this together, especially considering that H454 was just voted on 2 days ago. So really appreciate the slideshow. This is really a really good overview. I know I've got some questions. I see some hands raised already. So let me start with Rich, and then Tammy, you're next.
Mine's simple. I was hoping that you could email the slide package to us, because it was really good, and it'd be nice to be able to go through it more in depth, so that next time when we meet, we can have a little more time to formulate some questions. And
Rich, this was added to the agenda yesterday, so it didn't arrive in your mail packet because it wasn't added until yesterday. But you should have already gotten an email including it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't see it, but thank you.
Yeah.
And Chair Samuelson, it's also posted on the website under the meeting materials for today.
Tammy?
Thanks for the presentation. I just thought it might be helpful to clarify for the board that we also received additional resources to do this work. Right, so some of the things that you're seeing on our list of to-dos, right, we received additional appropriations both for the efforts to revamp and modernize the rules, but also to secure our own general counsel. Jennifer, maybe you want to speak some more to that. I think I didn't want the board to see all this stuff and be like, holy cow, but the legislature was actually quite generous and provided us many of the additional resources that we requested, especially for this effort to take on the task of modernizing the rules, which I personally am very pleased to see that we're going to have the ability to do that.
Thanks for raising that. So board members, you all will probably remember that Tammy and I testified a few times at the beginning of the legislative session about the State Board of Education, what we do, how we do it, our budget, and we had put together a budget request that, really, I think the board has raised the issue in prior years, but it really gained traction this year, which is wonderful because, as board members know, we were really put into a difficult situation where we have work to do and literally don't have the funds to do the work. And so, I had tried to get independent counsel to help us update CTE rules. We don't have money in the budget to do that. So I think that was appreciated by both the House and Senate Education Committees. They have apportioned $200,000 to the State Board of Ed on top of our regular budget. The $200,000 is for FY26, and that will allow us to retain counsel to assist us with this list of obligations that we have under statute, as well as, and this is something that Tammy and I had discussed with House and Senate Ed committees, having counsel on retainer, which is something that we feel is really, really important because for really good reasons, we don't rely on agencies counsel. We don't have that attorney-client relationship, but it really leaves the board stranded. So this will allow us to have counsel on retainer. And just to forecast how this is going to go, I anticipate that we will be putting out an invitation to bid. We'll start drafting it next week. It should go out in the next couple of weeks. And just knowing the way these things go, it will probably be at least 2 months before we have an attorney on board to help us. But that ball has been, put in the works. So this will really help us with the work that we need to get done. Tammy, did you have more before I pop over to Lyle?
No, I think it's exciting that we have resources to do the work that we've been wanting to do. And again, I'm really pleased and grateful to the legislature for acknowledging the fact that we do need to modernize the rules and sort of charging us with the responsibility and sort of giving us the resources to do that. I think that's really important work. And I think we're all really excited to step in and do that. So.
Yeah. And just to follow up on that, that $200,000 isn't even to update the rules. It is for us to do the work and then prepare a report that will be submitted with our proposal for what we want to do and the resources that we feel will be necessary to do that. So that will be a second request. Lyle and then Zoe.
Yeah, Torrin and Lindsay, thank you very much for putting this together. I'm looking at, and I'm going to quickly, Jennifer, get into the weeds, and you can tell me that's a question for next time, Lyle. Under independent schools, I see new criteria for approved independent schools. One is that they need to be located in a supervisory district or supervisory union that does not operate a public school for some grades as of July 1st, 24. Does that mean that currently approved schools cannot be reapproved? Does that mean new schools cannot be approved? Point me in the right direction.
Yes, I can respond to that, and we can go into more detail at the next meeting. So this does change the criteria for those independent schools that are eligible. So that does mean that certain schools that are currently approved would not be eligible to request approval in the future. The bill does also contemplate that those students currently enrolled would be grandfathered in so they could complete their academic career at those existing schools that are currently approved by our existing criteria. And the bill sets out really a two-stage eligibility requirement. One is really, as you pointed out, its current location and proximity to a public school, and then the threshold of the percentage of students receiving public tuition at that school. So there's further work we need to do as an agency to confirm and validate the data before putting forward that list of schools that would be eligible. And we will do that at a subsequent meeting.
And I assume it would not change the current work of the Independent Schools Committee, that we would continue forward with our current reviews?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's still students will be educated in these independent schools. And so it's, I think, our responsibility to ensure that we go through that approval process. We have three to approve, to bring forward to you today, and we can have further conversation around that. But we are still moving forward with addressing the backlog as expeditiously as we can.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to flesh this out, that new statutory language, which updates 16 V.S.A. Section 828 that you pointed out, Lyle, that goes into effect July 1st of this year. So that will implicate schools, because going forward, I guess there are two things. For schools that are currently approved, they will continue to be able to receive public tuition funds for the students that were there, I think, as of the who are currently enrolled, through the time that those students graduate from that school, whether it's K-6, K-8, high school, whatever, it will allow them to keep those students. But as of July 1st, if they don't meet that new definition that's been put into Section 828, they would not be eligible to receive public tuition for new students coming in. And so, that will sort of phase out over the next few years. And to your point about our 2200s approval committee, I thought about that too. And I do think because those schools that may not continue to be eligible under Section 828, but will still have students there until those students graduate, it does mean that we need to continue our review process just to ensure that the schools are complying with the rules. But that is a good point. And I think there are some schools on the list that have a lot more students that will survive the new definition. And so I don't know the order that the agency will be bringing schools to us. I can see the argument for, focusing on the schools that will continue through under the new definition, but it's the agency that brings the schools to the board.
So the redistricting will have a significant piece to play in this.
Yeah. Zoe, did you have a question?
I just wanted to also mention there are other appropriations for the Agency of Education to support this work. So it does come with an additional staff position for a special education division to support some of the planning and analysis that's required within this report. It also comes with 5 positions that were requested by the agency to support with the transformation work, and some resources to contract with consultants to further develop tools and resources to support the transition, along with training for the boards.
Thanks, Zoe. I had a couple of questions, and I wanted to turn back to H209 with the nasal epinephrine. Does the board need to engage in rulemaking to align with the new regulations that are in the bill?
That is
Yeah,
something that, yeah, go ahead, Lindsay.
No, I was just going to say the language does not explicitly call for rulemaking, but it does retain the language currently in statute that says that the state board maintains rules related. So I think the tweak could be made, but it does not explicitly call for an update to the rules.
Well, and truth be told, I don't think that we have any rules that bring the statute into our rules. Is that a correct? I mean, am I right in that assumption?
It references, I believe it references policy in the statute, but I'd have to take a closer look at the language.
Okay, because I'm wondering, as we are being charged to update our rules, this is something that we might want to tuck into that and do both at the same time.
Yeah, I can take a closer look and follow up with you.
Okay. All right, and then let me see, I had a couple other questions. Oh, under the supplemental reading instruction slide, there were 2 and I think this was section 10. It clarifies the intent of providing supplemental reading instruction for struggling readers in grades K through 12 rather than just K to 3. And then it says the language does not change other requirements in Act 139 and does not make all of Act 139 applicable to grades pre-K 12. So I just want to make sure that that is not a typo and that the first bullet is K to 12 and the second bullet is pre-K to 12.
Act 139 focus on K to 3, and so this is expanding and ensuring that we're providing those level of supports for our older students and adolescent students. We'll be sharing a memo to further expand on what is included in this bill. So there'll be information that will be forthcoming as early as today.
Okay. Well, and I'm wondering too if maybe it's struggling readers in grades K to 12 because maybe there aren't too many pre-K readers. I don't think that's the number of pre-K readers is 0, but maybe the focus was on kindergarten and up. I'm just trying to reconcile the first bullet says kindergarten and the second bullet says pre-K. Okay. And then my other question is, I know that H454 has some off-ramps where if things don't happen, then everything kind of implodes. And maybe this is a conversation for our next meeting, but I'm wondering how to plot that out with the directives that have been given to the State Board of Ed in terms of rulemaking and other things that we've been asked to do. I mean, I'm going to assume that this is going to survive, but I also am aware of the fact that, would we be engaging in work that is implementing some aspect of H454 and then H454 self-destructs, and then we've got, rules that are not tied to anything because the bill failed.
I think you're pointing out the bill is a path towards moving to a more equitable funding system through a foundation formula and to larger districts. There are a number of contingencies for the bill to move forward. I think what you're calling on is clarity around that overall timeline so that you can prioritize the state board's work and also that's really important. So I think we can dive into more of those details next month. We did outline the deliverables for the state board and the agency in chronological order to at least give that sense of what is time bound. But we can certainly position that in kind of a broader view of the other deliverables that are required to move this bill forward. And a significant milestone is the achievement of new districts, voting on new districts.
Great. Thank you. I think that would be a great idea. Maybe next month we'll do the next level of analysis and get a little bit more granular. Thank you. Lindsay?
Yeah, Chair Simonson, I just wanted to clarify your last question. I just looked back at the language and it's K-12 and K-3 in the language, not pre-K. So that was likely a typo on my end. Apologize.
No worries. Thank you. Other questions? All right. Well, I think it is fair to say that both the board and the agency are going to be pretty busy for the foreseeable future, which is great. I think we all want to do this work, and it's nice to have the funding behind it to allow us to do that, as well as some clarity around what we will be doing. So I think that's really helpful. All right. Well, if there's nothing further, this takes us to our next agenda item.
Thank you both.
Yes, thank you very much for putting this together.
Great.
So next is an update on the Commission on the Future of Public Education in Vermont. So a lot of this we've sort of touched on with with our last agenda item, but just briefly, we've only had one commission meeting since our last State Board of Ed meeting. We met at the Hartford Area Career and Technical Education Center on June 2nd. We had originally expected that we would be debriefing on the legislative session, and as we all know, that didn't happen because there was that 2-week hiatus, and then the legislature just reconvened on Monday to pass out H.4 54. So we sat around and had more conversations about what were commission members' thoughts that they might want to communicate to Representative Conlon, who also sits on the commission, but was also a member of the conference committee, that he could then take back to the conference committee. So we had some discussion about what members wanted to provide as feedback. We decided that we weren't going to have our meeting, which had been scheduled for this past Monday, the 16th, because there was not going to be anything new to discuss. We did keep the final public input session as scheduled for June 11th. So the commission had advertised 5 public input sessions. All 5 of those meetings were virtual. June 11th was the last meeting that was scheduled. It may be, now that the commission's charge has been changed by H.4 54, that there might be additional public input sessions. If there are, we'll certainly keep the board apprised and make sure that that's posted. And then, as Torrin just alluded, H.4 54 has now passed and it has changed the commission's scope. So we're still planning to have a termination date of December 31st. We are still charged with putting together a draft report by October 1st, with the final report due to the General Assembly by December 1st. And so in these next few months, our focus will be recommendations on what roles, functions, and decisions should be a function of local control, and what roles, functions, and decisions should be a function of control at the state level. The work will include recommended necessary updates to the roles and responsibilities of school district boards and the electorate, including amendments to 16 V.S.A. sections 562 and 563, a process for a community served by a school to have a voice in decisions regarding school closures and recommendations for what that process should entail, as well as a process for monitoring the implementation of this act in a manner that is transparent and public facing. So personally, I haven't had a whole lot of time to think about this, but I think it is helpful to have such a discrete and narrow charge that really does fit into the bigger work that's being done with education transformation. And I think that the commission, actually, one of the things that we talked about at our meeting, and I think it was Representative Conlon who said this, is that, part of the commission's value is that the commission members represent such a diverse, diverse aspects of the education community in Vermont, but that we have been able to come to consensus, and we're not just narrowly representing, whatever constituents are, sort of beneath us. So there is value, and I think that was one of the things that came out, is that commission members really do feel like there's value in the commission and really getting these diverse voices together at the table. And so I think to be able to continue that work and really think about state control versus local control, and what that might look like going forward with this new bill will be good work that we can help to further that conversation. So we do have our next commission meeting on July 7th. It will be virtual from 1 to 4 p.m. And I'll just pause there if there are any questions. All right. Well, hearing none, we're running a little ahead of schedule, which is never a problem, but Zoe, I will turn it to you for the secretary's report.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to provide a couple updates on some new systems that we are rolling out at the agency, and also to provide a federal update. So we are this summer rolling out a new licensing system. It will go live on July 15th. We've been working in a very coordinated fashion with our partners in the field to test the system, and it will bring major improvements that will streamline the overall licensing process. So we are excited to roll that out. We also yesterday just released our annual pre-K report, so I will share that with the board. That is an annual report that goes to the legislature to evaluate the universal preschool program. In the report, we've identified trends in terms of overall participation in the program, along with some of the performance indicators and expenditure. As we walk through in H454, JFO will further study pre-K to provide recommendations next legislative session around how we may want to fund pre-K to expand opportunities for students. So I will share that report with the board. We are also working with the HHB Council, so Hazing, Harassment, and Bullying Council. This was a committee that I reinstated. It's very much aligned to our priorities at the agency of focusing on safe and healthy schools. And this group is helping to provide input on the model policy. Since launching the council, we have expanded the membership to ensure that we have a diversity of perspectives involved, and also increase the frequency in which we're meeting to ensure that we're getting that authentic and meaningful feedback from the committee. We have released the model policy for feedback. We've received a lot of really helpful feedback that we are incorporating and will be sharing with the council next Monday to inform our future work. Related to federal updates, there are many federal updates, so I will share probably two that have been the most major implications on the field. As I relayed several months ago, the Biden administration had approved states to extend their ARP-ESSER funding, and so that's funding related to the COVID relief. And with the Trump administration used their discretion to deny those approvals of projects. And the projects at this in Vermont, covered a range of different programs, all of which were allowable under the grant as defined under the Biden administration, and included supporting construction mental health, tutoring, summer camp, and we also had a number of state level initiatives that we were rolling out. So I shared with the board that we have applied for a waiver. There is a waiver process to evaluate whether or not those funds could be extended. We submitted over 80 projects. Our team has worked very closely with districts to support them in preparing the most competitive requests and applications. Unfortunately, at this date, we've only received one approval, and that's for Kingdom East for their summer program. So we are very happy that Kingdom East will be able to get those funds to operate their summer program, but we have not heard back on the other district level request. We did receive a denial for the Read Vermont initiative and the costs that we incurred in supporting our teachers across the state with the science of reading. We're doing job embedded coaching. So it's certainly unfortunate. I think what we have seen also with other states is the feedback we have received is consistent with the outcomes in other states. It appears that the only projects that are being funded are direct tutoring. So projects that are supporting with teacher development or construction or mental health are being denied. Both in Vermont and across the state. So we are, with the one denial we are going through an appeal process, and we're continuing to stay tuned on the results of their further review. So I think that is obviously unfortunate and does create a very big fiscal impact on the state's ability to support our strategic priorities and also at the district level. And these were funds that our districts had been planning on. They were approved. They all represented allowable expenses. So this has been quite challenging to manage. I will say at the state level, I'll pause there. I see Lyle has a question.
Just quickly, you may have said it already, but the lost revenue, how much does that tally up to?
There's two pieces, and I'll ask the team for a quick number. So there's exposure in terms of costs that have already been incurred. So that's one set of funds, and then there were funds that were approved but not have been expended yet that were planned to be drawn down by next December. So let me just get the final figures. And I know last week I provided the chart as well, but let me just double check so I give you the correct numbers.
Okay, thank you.
It's significant.
As you look for that, it's pretty clear it's not something the state can cover, is what I'm hearing.
I will say at the state level, just in a very small example, with Read Vermont, we had designed that program using braided funds. And so we are continuing to move forward with the project. But certainly the scope has been decreased substantially because of the funding restrictions. So that's certainly we're feeling the impact of that. At the district level, many of the districts have been pursuing other funding sources for after school and things like that and have tried to be creative. But ultimately, this will represent a big impact on districts' ability to move forward with many of these projects.
Sorry, I was wondering why I was calling on Brian and then I just realized I'm muted. And Brian, I think you're muted.
Apologies. So thanks for this. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just repeating the rollout for teacher training with regard to reading, what you mentioned. Because I think we passed that a few years ago now, and just wondering where things are at.
Yes. So When I first arrived in Vermont, the legislature was wrapping up Act 139, and I was really excited about the implementation of this law. I think it's really critical that we're able to support our districts and our teachers with promoting high literacy outcomes for our students. And so we evaluated the ability for the agency to provide a larger amount of support, and we were able to draw on the remaining ARP ESSER funds at the state level to craft a program that really built upon the recommendations of the Literacy Advisory Council in providing, job embedded coaching and training for the field. So we rolled that out last year, and we've had a number of teachers participating. We've had really great participation from Professional Learning Network of districts and all levels of educators and all levels of system leaders within districts in this work. We were able to continue and to kind of wrap up the session with those teachers that were involved in kind of a not as robust, but in a limited capacity. And we're now shifting as we think about moving into next year around how we can use other state set aside funds and resources to continue our intensive support of helping to train our teachers in the best practices for teaching kids to read.
So if I may, just to follow up. So is this, you'll have to refresh my memory. Are people sort of self-identifying as to whether or not they're going through the program, or is this capturing everyone?
So there's probably two distinctions. One, Act 139 lays out some specific requirements for the district and also for the agency to support with that. We crafted Read Vermont to provide another layer of support from the state level that also provided training for teachers that support students in 4th through 12th grades as well. And so it was looking at a more comprehensive rollout, which is very much aligned with some of the other decisions that have been made this legislative session. So districts are required to do screening for students in K-3. The agency has put forward recommendations and guidelines around screeners that meet the criteria. We are also in the process of providing a recommendation to the standards board around updates to the educator prep programs. We will be requesting an extension of that deadline, and that's also because we had a pause in being able to work with our national consultant who has been supporting us in this work. We've been able to re-engage them again through kind of our braided funding approach. And they're helping us to provide some final consult on that report that will go to the standards committee this summer. So we are continuing to deliver on the requirements within Act 139. The impact is that we're not able as a state level to provide the level of support and training that we think is going to be really helpful to embedding these practices and supporting our desired outcomes over time. So we are working on that, but it has required us to shift and regroup around how we can maximize the funding we have available at the state level to support this important work.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
We'll also provide an update on Read Vermont. We'll do a wrap up so that everyone understands what has been accomplished in terms of fidelity of implementation of Act 139, and then the other training participation and results through Read Vermont. So we'll provide that. We are required to deliver that in December to the legislature, but we'll also provide an interim report over the summer.
Thank you. And I guess then, back to Lyle's question, it would be interesting to know the total amount and then specifically that amount that is being taken away from programs such as this. So thank you.
I just have a comment. One, the lawyer in me wants to bring up the theory of detrimental reliance, where that money was promised to the state and the state spended money on the belief that that money was going to be there to fund the program. So
interesting.
It's really frustrating. I can really empathize with what this is doing to these programs that we're trying to roll out, and the fact that money is spent and there's no money to back it up. And then, just kind of the larger issue is, where's the money going? As all of the money is being taken away, what's happening to it? Because it's not hitting my checkbook, it's not hitting your checkbook.
They're not spending. If you look at sort of the new budget, right, that's come out, like they're showing, you can very clearly see that even though they're appropriations, the cash is not going out the door. And it's not just for this, it's across the board.
Oh, I know.
For example, right, the $400 million in IES contracts for research.
Yeah,
the money
where's
is just
the money going?
No, it's just sitting in a bank account right now.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
I think it's just important for the board and the public to understand that the districts, all of our districts and the state followed the appropriate approval process, and we were granted the funds and they were allowable. And it has been a big impact for those who've been rescinded.
Jennifer, might I just ask one more follow-up?
Sure.
So Secretary Saunders, when you say you're going to appeal,
Correct.
Tell us just a little bit about that. Is that just back up to the federal agency of education kind of thing? Just take another look.
We are pursuing every opportunity to benefit from this funding that we originally awarded. And so when they communicated that these funds would be rescinded, they did offer a waiver process. So we have gone through in good faith of requesting a waiver. If the waiver is denied, states have the ability to appeal. And so we are now at that phase where we're appealing once we receive the denial. We are still waiting to hear on the large majority of our waiver request. But for the one that we do have a denial, we are pursuing an appeal. There is other legislative action that, or legal action that is occurring, and we're paying very close attention to that. I'll continue to keep you updated, and I can share more details around kind of what other states have pursued in terms of legal action and the results of that. But it'll continue to be a focus.
Thank you.
The challenge is it's a long process, and in the interim, programs and projects that districts thought were funded are no longer funded.
Okay.
I will say, right, that earlier this week, 20 of the major things that were canceled came back online, right, per the recent court case. So all the regional educational laboratories and other large work that was identified in statute came back online as of Tuesday. And all of the federal employees who have been RIF'd are back on the payroll at Ed. They're receiving their paychecks, although they have not been called back to work. So part of the other issue is there's no one at the U.S. Department of Education to actually do this work, right? And so that's also a challenge.
I think from the agency's perspective, we are trying to steady leadership through this, being really clear about, communicating what we know, being as responsive as possible, following all the procedures. There's a lot of uncertainty. And as Tammy's mentioned, decisions, there have been some decisions have been backtracked, right? Which we're continuing to pay attention to. So we're staying the course. On a related note, states have still not received all of their title allocations, which is unusual. This is a significant delay. So specifically for Title II-A, which funds professional development, and Title III, which funds our English learners, states have not yet received those allocations. This is challenging. Oh, Tammy, did you want to clarify?
I was gonna just clarify. I was gonna ask a follow-on question about whether or not you've received your IDA allegations, because my understanding is that those have been delayed as well.
I can confirm. I believe we have received our IDEA.
You got IDA? Okay. I think it's unclear. I think it's unclear whether you're going to receive Title II or Title III, correct?
That's correct. And so one of the challenge is that we we follow a consolidated grant application, which is best practice, and many other states do. And the idea is so that districts can braid funds and maximize resources to support the needs of their students. With the delay in these allocations, it creates a challenge for our districts to move forward with their grant applications. And so we submitted a communication yesterday to the field with guidance on how to move forward. And we're also providing office hours to superintendents and business managers over the next couple of weeks to support them in this process. So I wanted you to be aware, and also make sure that you have the memo of what we have communicated to the field. Tammy.
So the proposed fiscal 26 budget, which who knows if that's going to happen if we're going to just exist under continuing resolutions, but if that did happen, right? The consolidated federal programs, all those dollars are going to go out under the Title I formula, the 1A formula going forward. Have we done an analysis of what that does in terms of our overall level of funding for the state? Because my understanding is that could put Vermont at a significant disadvantage because those fixed grants, right, weren't tied to population and poverty counts, whereas now those allocations would be tied to poverty and population counts. So where are we sort of in trying to sort of foreshadow what that might look like going forward? Again, I don't know that the fiscal 26 is reality, right? But I'm just curious sort of what would block granting all of those dollars look like if those dollars went out strictly under the Title 1A formula without the fiscal equity adjustment?
So, we have continued to model potential outcomes, knowing that things are not final at this point. We might be helpful for the state board to focus on the legislative updates. We could share that at the July meeting, and I can bring in our team to provide more details around that, which I think could be quite helpful. It is really an uncertain time. And so we are trying to understand what the different impacts will be on these decisions, but I'm not at this point ready to be able to communicate what that final amount
I only
is,
asked because we were starting to talk about Title II and Title III.
Yeah.
That's sort of all part and parcel to that.
It is.
But yes, no, it wasn't in your presentation. So
so just wanted you to be aware of that. This is an issue that states are facing across the country, and we are working to be proactive and working with our districts and helping them navigate this so that we can get the substantial approval for their grants, recognizing that part of the allocation has been delayed, which creates, as I said, a challenge to our current process. So we are trying to be agile and responsive to these challenging situations and supporting the districts along the way. So just wanted you to be aware of that. So those were the major updates that I had. We've walked through, some of the legislative updates, which call for a number of reports for the agency. So that'll be a lot of work that will be underway over the summer, along with bringing on the additional staff resources that we included in the bill and some of the consulting support as well to manage through the transformation.
Thank you so much, Zoe. That is a lot, lots of moving pieces, and just really appreciate your oversight, and I'm grateful for the braided resources, because although I think there are a lot of challenges that we face, I think it's good that we still have the ability to continue some of these programs thanks to other sources of funding. So I think that was those efforts are paying off, but this is a really tough place to be in. Other comments or questions for Zoe?
Just that again, Zoe, I'm glad you're there, glad you're keeping an eye on everything. I recognize the struggles and I just appreciate you and your entire team during this moment. So thank you.
All right.
I appreciate that. We have a really good team.
Seems like.
Yeah, and everyone is very much laser focused on kind of evaluating the changing landscape and working with the field to communicate clearly what we know. And when there are outstanding questions, we are transparent around that. And then when we have points in time where we really need to pivot in order to, for example, for the grant program to be able to allow our districts to move forward, we're being responsive to that and making adjustments as needed.
Great.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you very much.
All right, so this takes us to our next agenda item, which are 3 independent schools that are up for reapproval. Board members may recall we've been on hiatus with our independent school approvals for over a year. The 2200 rule series, which governs the approval process for independent schools, has been through a couple of significant rule updates over the last few years. And the agency in the interim has developed their technical assistance review form and to ensure the compliance with the rules as they've been updated. And so I think we are now at the point where the floodgates are opening and we have a few dozen independent schools that we will be considering over the next few months to try to address the backlog as quickly as we can. So we are starting off today with 3 schools, and Tom, who chairs the committee, is unable to be with us today, but Lyle has agreed to step into Tom's shoes. So Lyle, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, and thank you. I'll try to be as efficient as Tom. Just a reminder to the committee or the board, the process is that the Agency of Education has gone through a careful vetting of what we are about to talk about today. It is then brought to our committee, which again reviews the request for renewals, which is what we're doing today. And then we bring recommendations to you based on what we have heard both from the agency and from the schools that join us at the committee meeting. So there are 3 schools, and I'll let the cat out of the bag now. We're going to request that you approve all 3 of them. 2 are schools, and I'll talk about 2 of them jointly. One is Cornerstone School, and the other is Arlington School. Both are overseen by Northeast Family Institute, NFI, and both are trauma-based day treatment schools in the Northeast Kingdom in St. Johnsbury. NFI runs actually 4 different schools. There are the 2 in St. Johnsbury that we're talking about today. There's one in Morrisville and there's one in Morgan. The 2 we're talking about today work very closely together, and they have the structure of NFI is that they have a board overseeing these 4 schools, and there is an administrator that is, for lack of a better term, is kind of the superintendent, but each one of the schools has its own administrative structure built into the school itself. They are therapeutic structured learning opportunities for students who may not be as successful in a public school setting. And so the public schools choose to tuition the students to these schools. They have therapeutic services, including family outreach, individual counseling, and case management. They work very closely with the families. We were very impressed with both Cornerstone and Arlington when they came before us. And interestingly enough, and I went back and did a little review of their history. They, in 1984, and I won't go through every year of their history, just going back, and then I'll jump to the future here. In 1984, the state of Vermont reached out to NFI and asked them to develop programming that would allow students, children, adolescents, not to go to the state hospital. They wanted a different opportunity for students. NFI worked closely with UVM, and it evolved into today 4 different schools in the Northeast Kingdom. They partner with the Agency of Human Services, mental health, the children and families, school districts, and the families very, very carefully. Today, the first school that we're talking about is Cornerstone. Cornerstone is a K-8 school, again, run by Northeast Family Institute, and they are requesting a 5-year renewal. The Agency of Ed did a very thorough vetting and provided a wonderful report to us. We had questions of the school that when we met with them, but primarily we are forwarding to this committee the recommendation that we approve for renewal of a 5-year period of time, Cornerstone, which is a K-8 school. They currently serve 25 students with a maximum of 35. They have 8 LEAs that send to them, including 1 district from New Hampshire. They have clinical staff on hand daily. Their population skews pretty much 50-50 between the K3 to the 4 to 8. Their goal is reintegration to their sending school. So what's the process? Would you like me to make a motion and then everybody can then talk about this if they'd like to or ask questions?
Yeah, you can make the motion if you'd
Happy
like.
to do that. Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we, the full board, the State Board of Education, accept the recommendation of the Secretary of Education to grant renewal of therapeutic school approval to Cornerstone School, St. Johnsbury, Vermont, for a 5-year term through June 30th of 2030, upon the condition that the school reports to the Agency of Education within 5 business days, whenever any changes occur in enrollment, programs, policies, facilities, financial capacity, staffing, or administration during the approval period.
I'll second that motion.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had a quick question, and it's language that is both in the Cornerstone and in the Arlington school report from the agency. And so I'm looking at the Cornerstone report on the very top of page 6. And it's that first paragraph says, based on the rules for special education approval for independent schools, the special education team finds that Cornerstone School has no findings regarding the criteria for renewal of its approval status. I just didn't understand what that sentence means, and I'm wondering if someone can explain it to me, if you know.
See a big question mark over my head? Yeah. There's Deb.
I'll start and I can let Deb expand on that. So as you recall, when we developed a process to address the backlog, we had identified a dedicated member from our special education team to be part of the review. And so that special education expert has been evaluating the compliance with the rules through that review process. And so that is inclusive of all of the updates that were included as part of your recent rulemaking series, but I'll allow Deb to expand on that.
Thank you, Secretary Saunders. Part of the unique issue for this particular school is we had conducted the boots on the ground site review with the special education liaison a number of years ago, couple years ago, and that special ed liaison no longer works at the agency. So as part of the new standard application submission and the extensive desk audits that the independent school team performed to ensure that all of our schools meet the state board requirements, meant that we also had to work closely with the special ed team to have an extra layer of review to ensure that the special ed program meets the requirement, since that our original special ed liaison no longer works for the agency. So it's like this extra layer of scrutiny that we found that the school has met all of the requirements.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
We also have Chris Kane from our team, from the special education team. I see his hand is raised and he can provide some additional context as well.
Thanks, Secretary Saunders. Chris Kane, Assistant State Director of Special Education. I would just add that as Deb was saying, that line is just specifically indicating there are no findings of non-compliance. Okay. I think, as you pointed out, the line itself is not maybe well articulated, and we do have a new template that doesn't have clearly states what the finding is. But as Deb said, this was sort of an older template and an older review that was then updated through the sort of new approval process. So the data is included from that original report.
Thank you. Tammy?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the special education component as well. So if I'm understanding correctly from sort of what you said just now and what I understood the desk audit involved, right, is that there's a form that they filled out and they checked some boxes that said they complied. And is that the data that you're using?
No, they had to submit policies. They had to submit documentation. The independent school team, it's very laborious and takes time.
For special education?
Yes, for special education, but also just as an independent school to meet all the criteria and policy requirements.
So does this school have a licensed special educator on staff pursuant to 2229.2?
Yes. Yep.
And that position is filled?
Yes.
Okay. And that's not one position that's shared across the schools?
Oh, no. And
that person is licensed?
Yes, all of them have to be. We have to look at that too. That was part of the desk audit. We had to look at staffing criteria. Special educators had to be licensed. We had the help of our dedicated special ed liaisons to review the special ed program for federal and state requirements.
Okay. So I think it would be, just going forward, it'd be helpful to be specific about that stuff, because I think that we are hearing the same thing from Jennifer. It's like this sort of blanket statement, yet we have to sort of know that certain things have been checked off. And that's one of the things that's in the rules that we have to sort of verify, that there is either that there's a licensed special educator on staff, or that they have a contract, right, with an organization or an entity who can provide those services.
Yep. Part of the report does state, in the staffing section, it does clarify.
Which report? The 2023 report?
Yes.
That's not now, though, right?
Please let Deb explain what is included in the report.
And the report does state who we interviewed at the time, and then the addendum then takes a look at from the date of the report that had to be paused until after the standard apps came in and the desk audits were completed. There is specific language that addresses the special education components to verify whether there's a Vermont licensed special educator on staff.
Yeah, I guess I'm not seeing that in the addendum that I'm reading.
Okay. All right. I can pull that up.
So I think in terms of responding directly to the question, what the team is indicating is that upon the review, there are no areas of non-compliance. What I'm hearing in the follow-up questions is to confirm certain areas of compliance per the rule. So are there other specific questions that you have just to give assurances? But what we're communicating from our team's review is that they have looked at all the different components of the governing rules and are saying there are no areas of non-compliance, which is part of the recommendation for approval. So I think we've affirmed or confirmed the licensing question. Are there any other specific questions that you have around compliance with the rules that you'd like us to explicitly address?
I didn't have any. Mine was about the special education and in particular staffing, because I know there are real staffing challenges in the field right now.
All right, so we have a motion that's been seconded. If there's no further discussion, I'm not going to make Lyle reread the motion. We have it on the green sheet. All those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those
The next-
opposed?
Sorry.
All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? All right. The motion carries. Congratulations to Cornerstone. And Lyle, I'll turn it back to you.
Sure, their partner school in St. Johnsbury is the Arlington School. It's a K-8, 8 through 12, school. They are looking for a 5-year renewal as well. In addition to that, they're looking for for permission to increase their capacity from 45 to 50 students. The agency staff looked at the current staffing patterns there and did not feel there would be any adverse issue with adding students, that they feel that they have both staffing capacity and facility capacity. Very similar report from what we received from Cornerstone. Let me look back at the number that they currently serve right now. So they are currently approved for 45 students. I don't see at the time of the visit, Deb, how many students. They had 44 currently enrolled at the visit, and they are looking to increase that. And they are hearing anecdotally that area LEAs are looking for more placement spots. Students do have access to CTE offerings at St. Johnsbury Academy, as well as driver ed training. They can participate in activities after school. They have very high graduation rates. They feel they're being quite successful. And I will read a motion, and then you can ask questions that I may or may not have answers to. So I would like to make a motion that that the full State Board of Education accept the recommendation of the Secretary of Education to grant renewal of therapeutic school approval to Arlington School, St. Johnsbury, Vermont, for a 5-year term through June 30th, 2030, upon the condition that the school reports to the agency within 5 business days whenever any changes occur in enrollment, program policies, facilities, financial capacity, staffing, or administration during the approval period. Furthermore, that the State Board of Education grant an increase in maximum enrollment from 45 to 50 students.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns? Tammy.
Just the same question. I just want to confirm that we verified that they have a licensed special educator on staff there.
In the report,
Yes.
It indicates yes.
Yeah,
I think it's
in
on
the
page
addendum,
7.
it does, it doesn't say that in the addendum.
Well, it does at the bottom when it talks about provision of special education by rule number. And the language in the addendum indicates that the school has met all the requirements for provision of special ed, which would also mean they have a Vermont licensed special educator on staff. If they did not, the addendum would clarify that they do not currently have a special educator on staff.
Yeah, Deborah, thanks for that clarification. The reason I'm asking is there was some misunderstanding last fall about whether or not that was a requirement or not, right? And we had an updated, a form needed to get updated. So I just want to make sure that we've confirmed that they're licensed special educators on staff at these schools. And it sounds like you have, so it's an easy question to answer.
Yeah, and it was my understanding that therapeutic schools did not have an option. They have to have a Vermont licensed educator. And these 2 schools, Cornerstone and Arlington, are therapeutic schools.
That's right. That's right. That's just why I just want to confirm that everybody's on the same page and that we've verified that they have them.
Yep. And I just want to clarify for the record that there was no prior confusion around the requirements for special education license for therapeutic schools. So I want to be clear on that. And in the chat, you can see on page 7 in both reports, it's indicated, and then also the addendum is referencing full compliance with the rules, which include licensure.
To your point earlier, Tammy, about the improvements to be made, I think you'll see in the more recent reports that it's more of a checklist, explicit.
Great. Thanks, Lori.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lori. That's helpful. Appreciate it.
I had one question on page 6 of the report, and I do realize that the initial report was April 13th, 2023. So this may be an issue that has been corrected, but I was wondering if you could explain under 2228.3 faculty qualifications. Aside from one fingerprinting question, all staff are qualified to serve in the positions that they are in. I don't know if you have some background for the board on that and how it's been resolved.
Yeah, the reason why there was even an issue in the first place had nothing to do with the fault of the school or the staff. It was the post-COVID backlog at VCIC that prevented the staffer had already been fingerprinted and had submitted the documentation. The school just didn't have that on hand in the professional folder. And so we saw the application and we saw the signature of the staff and the date that they had actually submitted their background check information. And the way that the school was addressing the backlog was to ensure that the staff person was never with students unsupervised by other staff or the head of school until VCIC could complete their backlog and get those notifications out to independent schools. Schools were often waiting as much as 12 or more weeks to receive their, and it was a heavy burden on independent schools around verification of criminal background checks. And that included the child and adult abuse registry background check backlog as well at that time. That's since been eliminated. They're now on time.
Thank you. Any other board questions for the team? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Congratulations to Arlington School. And Lyle, back to you.
And our final school today is Saxon Hill Kindergarten, located in Jericho. Saxon Hill is a 5-star program, 5 stars for Step Ahead recognition system. They are licensed by the Department of Children and Families to operate a center-based child care and preschool program. They are also accredited by the National Association of Education of Young Children. They are requesting a the maximum of a 2-year renewal. They currently, at the time of the visit, had 12 students with a maximum capacity of 16. At the time, all were currently pre-K in enrollment. They have 2 3-day programs and 1 4-day program, and then a kindergarten program of 4 days. They are child-centered class. They have child-centered nature classes. They focus on the individual student. It is what they would affectionately describe as a parent cooperative where there's a lot of volunteerism. There is access. If you want to see a great student handbook, you want to go to their parent handbook. It has all the information you'd ever want to see about the school, including how to access funding if there's need on the part of the family. So I will read a motion and then you can ask questions about the school. The energy was palpable, I must say, coming through the screen when we were talking to the teachers. They are very excited about what they do. So I'll read the motion here, which is, I'd like to make a motion that the full State Board of Education accept the recommendation of the Secretary of Education to grant renewal of kindergarten approval to Saxon Hill Kindergarten, Jericho, Vermont, for a 2-year term through June 30th of 2027, upon the condition that the school reports to the Agency of Education within 5 business days whenever any changes occur in enrollment, programs, policies, facilities, financial capacity, staffing, or administration during the approval period.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And just to reiterate, Lyle, you had alluded to this, but in our rules, we can only approve a kindergarten for a 2-year period. So that is the maximum that's allowed by rule. Any board member questions?
Look up Saxon Hill Kindergarten and look for their parent handbook. Very well done. I want to show it to other schools.
Excellent. Well, and I often envision the State Board of Ed as sort of being a clearinghouse for an exchange of good ideas. And I would love to see that happen. But it would be great if Saxon Hill wanted to put that parent handbook. We can link it in the minutes, just in case other kindergartens want to be inspired. So thank you, Lyle. Betsy.
And maybe oh, sorry, go ahead. Betsy's got her hand up.
Oh, first of all, Lyle, thank you very much. We worked really hard on that in the last couple of years to make some updates and changes. So before I leave, when my turn is over, am I able to link in the chat? I'll do that. And I apologize for not having a camera today. While I'm in front of this group, it's really important for me to say that should the state of Vermont ever want to spend some time looking into the state of public kindergartens, I have a perspective that I would love to be a part of that. I was an educator in public schools for 20 years, 15 of that was kindergarten, and now I'm at this beautiful independent school. And so our public kindergartens could really use some attention from the early educator lens. And so should that ever be, please come find me. Had to take my opportunity to share that.
Betsy, if you don't mind, would you put your email also in the chat?
I would love to do that. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And one thing that was great to see is that Betsy and her team put in their parent handbook, which I'll keep talking about, how parents can access Act 166 funding in support of the tuition. I don't know if in the future, maybe this is a conversation for the future, if as we move forward with 454 or other acts, if Act 166 will be influenced by any changes in the future. But that's a question for another day, probably.
All right. If there are no further comments or questions, all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries, and congratulations to Saxon Hill School. And just want to take a moment to thank Lyle. Nicely done. You really sold the schools, and I think you did a great job. And also, I just want to thank the independent school team for the work that you've done and for being with us today. And I think we will get to know each other very well over these next few months. So thank you.
The staff is wonderful when they come to our meetings. They, as you see today, they have answers to all the questions. They're in it up to their knees. So, and tell Tom that we finished right at 10:30.
I will. All right. Well, we are exactly on schedule. I don't even want to bleed over into the next minute because I don't know that this has ever happened. We are due for a break. If everyone can come back promptly at 10:45, that's a nice 15-minute break. And we will pick up the request by the Paine Mountain School District for an adjustment of supervisory union board composition. All right. Thanks, everyone. Turn your cameras and microphones off. So just to, we've got some school district members with us here today. But just to kind of set the table on this, this is a request by the Paine Mountain School District to alter pursuant to 16 V.S.A. section 719, the board composition of the supervisory union of which it is a member. Paine Mountain and Echo Valley Community School District are the two members of the Central Vermont Supervisory Union. Currently, and this is a default under 16 V.S.A. 266, the CVSU board is comprised of 3 members from each school district, although the populations of the underlying districts are not on equal footing. The composition at the SU level is. When I was first approached by Paine Mountain with this request, I did ask it to try to work with Echo Valley and to jointly submit something to the board for our consideration. That effort proved unfruitful. And so then I've asked both school districts to present information that you now have in your agenda packet to explain their thinking behind the request, whether they are in favor of it or opposed to it, as well as why. and asked them to submit minutes and any other evidence that would kind of help to support their positions. So we've got school district members here with us today. I further asked each side to be available to present to the board for about 5 to 10 minutes per side, just to explain their position. We'll have time for board member questions, and then depending on whether board members feel like we have enough information, we will make a decision today, or if we need more information, we can request that and defer a decision until a later date. So it really depends on how the next little bit of time goes and how board members feel. But this is something that is entirely within the board's discretion. So there's not a definite right or definite wrong answer. We do have a green sheet. I'd ask the agency to prepare one to assist the board in its analysis, as well as to provide a recommendation to the board. So you have that in the agenda packet as well. So with no further ado, I believe we will start with Paine Mountain. And it looks like we've got Rama Schneider with us. Oh, and actually, Rama, before I go to you, Lyle, I see that your hand is raised.
Thank you. And just for transparency purposes, and this only tells you how old I am. In the late 80s, I was principal at Orange Center School for 2 years, and then I was principal at Washington Village School for 2 years. So I worked within what was then Orange North Supervisory Union, which sent students to different locations, most to Williamstown, I think. So I just wanted to put that out there for transparency purposes. I don't think I have a conflict of interest. I'm not gaining revenue from any of those schools anymore. But I do think I see one of my friends on the screen. Is Lee still Lee Gardner? If it's the same Lee Gardner who was my boss at Washington Village School, he was on the board at that time too. He must have been 12 though, so I'm the only one that got older. So just transparency. Thank you.
So, and Lyle, I know you and I had a conversation about this, and we did follow up, and the advice that we got back is that there is, well, the standard is a board member has to recuse him or herself if there is an actual conflict or the appearance of a conflict to a reasonable person. And it was communicated that Lyle clearly does not have an actual conflict of interest, and really likely that a reasonable person would not think that you have an appearance of a conflict either. But I will pause there. We've got the parties with us, and I don't know if any of the school districts have an objection to Lyle being a part of this conversation. If so, Lyle, I would just ask you to recuse yourself.
Jennifer, thank you for that. This is Dan Morris speaking, and I think I'm the only current board member representing PMSD on the call at this time. And just for the record, Rama Schneider has his hand up, and he's got resident of PMSD in his identification there, but he's actually not on the board at this time. And just as the representative of the board of PMSD, I just want to say thanks, Lyle, for letting us know about that. I don't have an objection to you being in this conversation and voting. So just that can be our position on as to Lyle's past work for Orange and Washington.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Does anyone else want to speak on this issue before we turn to the actual merits of the case? All right. I'm not hearing anyone. Lyle, I think you were good to stay on. I agree. I think that you don't have any sort of ongoing relationship with either of the parties, and as long as you are comfortable that you can be objective in rendering a decision, I'm comfortable with having you stay on for this portion of the agenda.
Thank you.
And so do you agree that you can be objective?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. All right. So Dan, shall I start with you on behalf of Paine Mountain?
That would be great. Thank you so much, Chair Samuelson. It's really great to be here. And just for anyone who doesn't know, hi, my name is Dan Morris. I'm a resident of Northfield. I'm a parent of 3 students in the Northfield schools. They're all having their last day of school right now, actually. And I'm the chair of the Paine Mountain Board of Directors. First of all, I just want to thank the board for hearing this request to reconstitute the CVSU board. We appreciate the time and consideration given to our request. Second, I want to emphasize that Paine Mountain values and appreciates our relationship with Echo Valley Community School District. We have had a strong working relationship with Echo Valley Board and communities of Washington and Orange. We want this strong relationship to continue for as long as CVSU remains our supervisory union, and we want the board and public to know that our request to reconstitute the CVSU board is not at all motivated by a bad relationship between the districts. As to the substance of this request, at heart, this is a question of what's fair in the context of representation, because SU boards and their members are fundamentally bodies that represent the values and interests of the constituents and students that they serve. In conversations about education, we often talk about equality, equity, and proportionality as principles of fairness. Each of those is a different principle, and each is clearly more appropriate in different contexts. Equality is a principle of fairness according to which it's right to treat all people or groups equally. Equality is clearly the appropriate principle of fairness when it comes to citizens voting, being protected and held accountable by the law, and being paid for their labor. No reasonable person, I take it, would want an equity or proportionality approach to allocating citizens' votes in a presidential election, for example, or determining their accountability to the law, or being paid wages across differences of race, sex, or gender. Equity, on the other hand, is a principle of fairness according to which it is right to treat people differently in the interests of equal access to good outcomes. Equity is clearly the appropriate principle of fairness when it comes to spending on education for people with a variety of different needs, experiences, and histories of trauma. We are guided by the principle of equity when it comes to special education spending, and certainly we should be. Students with greater needs should get more resources in order to access excellent outcomes in their educational careers. Equality and proportionality would be inappropriate principles to use when thinking about special education funding. And then lastly, proportionality is the principle of fairness according to which people are allocated resources and benefits in proportion with their size or need relative to the larger body being served. Proportionality is clearly the appropriate principle when it comes to representation. Constituencies' voices should be roughly aligned with their size relative to the general populace being represented. Disproportionality in representation is fundamentally unfair, as it magnifies the voices and values of one group and dilutes the voices and values of others. Supervisory union boards are representative bodies, and therefore proportionality should be the guiding principle in allocating board seats. I take it that by inviting districts to make the kind of request that we are making now, 16 V.S.A. 719C recognizes both that supervisory unions are representative bodies and that proportionality is the appropriate principle of fairness to designate their seats. Note that 16 V.S.A. 719C allows the state board to, quote, adjust the supervisory union board representation required by section 266 of this title to more fairly and accurately reflect the relative number of students for which each district is responsible, end quote. When the statute says relative number of students in the context of SU board seat allocation, it's clearly recognizing that SU boards are representative bodies and that proportionality should be the guiding principle. In the materials provided prior to today's meeting, PMSD showed specific situations in which the disproportionate representation was felt particularly acutely in the communities of Williamstown and Northfield. Specifically, when appointing a superintendent, possibly merging with other districts, and dividing SU costs, the fact that PMSD's voice has been diluted by the disproportionately small representation has been confusing and frustrating to members of our communities. PMSD is aware that we are in a time of flux for educational governance structures, to put it mildly, and that SU boards may look radically different as a result of legislation currently being adopted at the state level. However, we also believe that because the details of that legislation are still being considered and the timeline to implementation is still quite long, our request to reconstitute the CVSU board still has merit at this time. PMSD represents 85% of the students and taxpayers across CVSU, and therefore it should have 85% of the seats on the SU board. We thank the State Board of Education for considering our request, and no matter what the outcomes of this conversation and the legislative work on education are, we remain committed to working with the state and Echo Valley for the best possible education opportunities for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. I have some questions, but before I jump in, do other board members have questions? I'm just curious. Well, one of the things I noticed with Echo Valley's submission, they included a chart that showed populations in other SUs and the SU board member composition. Do you know, are there supervisory unions out there that have more proportionate representation, such as what you're requesting?
That's a good question. I don't know any that do. I reached out to the chair of the board from Otter Valley, who had recently made the request, and I never heard back for that conversation. So I don't know of any other SUs in the state that do have a more proportionate representation structure, but I do think that's the belief in Paine Mountain that just because there are not SUs that have a more proportionate board structure doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue that as a kind of way of being the most fair with representation that we can.
Okay. The other thing is, I've heard you say that Paine Mountain has 85% of the student population. I think that's been corrected in the agency's green sheet because I think the calculation that you submitted doesn't account for the fact that there are high school students in Echo Valley for whom Echo Valley is responsible for educating. And the way I crunch the numbers, it's more like you have 4 times as many students. It's still a significant difference in population, but it's not 6 times as many.
Okay, thank you. And I think I appreciate that correction. We'll absolutely stand corrected on numbers as the state sees them. I was using the numbers from our last SU board meeting reported by the superintendent, and also it seems like when a district sends its high school students to other districts, the way of counting becomes a little bit unclear. And they still maybe are responsible, but in what ways and how is a kind of different set of questions.
Okay. The other question I had was, and I spent some time going through the minutes. It seems, and I want to check my understanding on this because this is really me, connecting dots, and I want to make sure that I'm actually drawing a line here. With regard to the superintendent search, am I correct that there was a steering committee that was put together that was comprised of 14 members? There were 10 from Paine Mountain and 4 from Echo Valley. Is that true? Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the SU board created the steering committee to do the bulk of the work for the superintendent search. That was 10 Paine Mountain, 4 Echo Valley. That steering group then brought its recommendation back to the supervisory union board. And I understand that one of the supervisory union board members was not there the day of the vote, but it was a unanimous vote to move forward with the superintendent, right? And I'm not trying to suggest anything.
That's right and fine and well noted. And I just also want to say, with regard to the superintendent issue, like the superintendent piece of this, Paine Mountain, as reflected in the superintendent's evaluation, we're very happy with our current superintendent. He's been great, and the process didn't have any actual, flare-ups or moments when when there were major problems. But nevertheless, people on the Paine Mountain side did find it confusing and frustrating that the ultimate responsibility was, the steering committee may make recommendation, but the ultimate responsibility for appointing and overseeing a superintendent lies with the SU. And at that time, the people in Northfield and Williamstown, you speak to them in the parking lot and explain the process to them, and they would say, "Wait a minute, why is it that the town with the biggest population has only one person on this board of 6, and it feels like our voice is not there? It didn't actually happen that our voice was, an injustice was done, but nevertheless, in principle, the voice should be proportionate to, they feel the voice should be proportionate to the residents and the constituents."
Okay, thank you. Lyle, I see your hand is raised.
Was that for me? Sorry.
Yeah.
I was in the process of sneezing. I'm back now. Question of Daniel, how long has Paine Mountain and Echo Valley been together?
I believe this was an alignment from 2018.
And a question for Zoe, and I'm trying to look it up right now in the legislative handout that you presented today. When is the reconstituted slate of districting intended to go into effect?
The districting task force will put forward up to 3 recommendations January of next legislative session for an up-down vote. Assuming that one of those is passed, the elections will take place on the spring of, is it 27? Spring of 27. And then it would go into effect with the new foundation formula for fiscal year 29.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Paine Mountain before we turn it to Echo Valley? Okay, I'm not seeing any, and of course we'll have a discussion following Echo Valley's presentation. So I am a little, Rama, I do see that your hand is raised. Are you here on behalf of Echo Valley?
No, I'm here as a resident of the Paine Mountain School District who resides in Williamstown.
Okay. Are you, did you have, I guess I'm trying to understand the capacity in which you're appearing before the board today. Are you also presenting to the board on behalf of Paine Mountain, or are you just here to listen?
I am here as a resident of the Paine Mountain School District. I have specific information to provide as somebody who is very involved in creating the Paine Mountain School District, and I think I should have the chance to be heard.
Okay, so you are, I'm just trying to go back in my head and I'm thinking out loud here. When I asked each school district to make a presentation to the board, were you a part of that plan? Or
Not
are you?
That I'm aware,
okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I am here as a citizen of Vermont and a resident of the Paine Mountain School District.
Okay. So I think it's up to our discretion whether or not we allow, I mean, we don't typically allow public comment in the middle of our meetings. Board members, what's your?
Yeah, I share that. I do share your concern. I don't know if it's a concern of yours, but I do. It seems like letting one person without having notified people that this would be an opportunity for others to do it at this moment, it strikes me as not a good idea, and that people should wait and have the opportunity at the end when we have that. If we had put out a notice that said, okay, this is an opportunity for a public hearing on this topic, I would feel differently about it.
Yeah, and I think that we did have public comment at the beginning of our meeting, and I realized
Right. We'll have it again, right? Yeah,
it all happened again at the end of the meeting. Yeah. So okay. I think that's
Can
the
I
right
just
answer.
ask one question? I mean, you will be making a decision,
We may or may not be making a
presumably,
decision.
and if you do make a decision, a comment at the end of the meeting is of no value whatsoever, so.
Right, and
I would like to,
I'm trying to sort of follow our rules and be transparent with members of the public. And, you know, and I will say too, we don't typically engage in a conversation with members of the public. I just want to make sure that we're doing things properly, which is why I was eliciting information from you so that we could reach the right decision. But I think what I will say is I'm going to reiterate that we may or may not reach a decision today. The board has to have that conversation. But we did warn public comment at the beginning of our meeting, which we had that space available, and we will have it again at the end of our meeting. So I understand your frustration, but I think I have to follow along with our open meeting law requirements. So I appreciate you being here, but at this point, I am going to turn it over to Echo Valley.
Can I just make one quick comment?
Sure.
I think, you know, it is a subject that he's got interest in, and he does have some standing on it. And I think that although we don't usually allow public during it, it's not like it's not like me coming from down south just saying, hey, I want to comment on that because it may affect me in the future. And I think as long as we're everything we've always been told is as long as we're consistent, so we don't just let everybody weigh in. But I think if we were to, if we felt that it would be good to let somebody from the public speak, we can just say, okay, if there's anybody from the public, we're going to give you one chance to speak and we'll give you 2 minutes. And as long as we're consistent, we can do that, I would think, and it does, because this is the one place that, you know, they're going to get to weigh in, and they don't know if we're going to make a decision. And his point was very well taken. You know, it's kind of like closing the door in the barn after the horses are all out, because we'll have made a decision and he wouldn't get to weigh in on it. So I'd like to reserve the right to discuss it after we get more information and see where we're headed to possibly do that. And I don't know how many public we have, but.
Well, and I will say that this agenda item has been posted. You know, we've been very clear that we were having this on the agenda, you know, since last month. The agenda was posted on Friday. Anyone can always email, and we did have public comment at the beginning of the meeting. I'm not sure I want to go down some rabbit. We're going to chew up our time on the actual substance. I do see that Emily Simmons is on the call, and I realize that Emily does not represent the board. I don't know if Emily has any interpretation of open meeting law and how we warn our meetings that might be helpful.
I mean, your open meeting law expert, Rich, just made some really good points. So I won't go further than that, but wanted to let you know that I am here.
Okay, thank you.
And remember, you know, you can ask 3 attorneys a question and get 7 answers. So I'm definitely not an expert either, but I just, you know, I just like to be maybe more inclusive. So I know that if anything ever gets challenged, you know, the more lenient you are, a lot of times, some of the times the people in the robes and the black robes will tend to like you better and maybe give you, even if you weren't perfect, they'll give you a little leeway. And I will shut up.
Quickly, because again, I don't want us to get too far off the path here. I see Gray that your hand is up, and Tammy, yours as well. And maybe just be brief, you know, yes, no, what, and we'll try to flesh this out a little.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to talk about this longer than we have to, but I'll say I don't think we should let anyone from the public comment on this right now because of the reason Brian pointed out, which is, you know, that it's not warned ahead of time. And I understand that in the moment, it's true that anyone here could then come and comment. But the issue is that there could be people that would want to have said something about this and would have gone to the meeting if they thought that's what this is a public hearing about it. There could be all sorts of people that attend for that purpose, but it's not. And what we have on the agenda is just for 2 presentations. So I really don't think we can take, well, I guess not even a question of whether or not we can. I don't know the legal things about it. I just don't think we should, because I think that's wrong in this case.
Thanks, Gray. Tammy?
I was going to say the same thing as Gray and Rich. I understand your point too. And so it seems to me that what we need to do now is hear both presentations, take a minute to decide whether or not we're going to decide today or not. Maybe, you know, based on the fact that now I know that perhaps people want to comment on this, maybe that's a good reason for us to not decide. And then we are far more inclusive and put a call out to say we do want public comment on this and be more explicit on that at our July meeting. But I do think that for fairness sake, that, you know, yes, it's on the agenda, but we should be clear and inclusive in that. So, and we don't usually take public comment in the middle of the meeting.
Okay. I think I'm going to go with that. And I think if board members feel like we want more information at the conclusion of, you know, hearing from Echo Valley and board member discussion, then I think we always have the option to delay a decision on this to our next meeting, and we can invite input from members of the affected school districts. So I'm going to pause there. We'll turn it over to Echo Valley and then continue on with our discussion. Do we have someone from Echo Valley here?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Oh,
Great.
I see you too.
Yeah, sorry, Mike Conchesi here. Well, first of all, thank you for allowing Echo Valley to be heard today. Just to introduce myself, I'm currently the Director of Finance and Operations for Caledonia Central Supervisory Union. So I serve 6 boards professionally, and in my spare time, I joined both Echo Valley Community School District as well as Central Vermont Supervisory Union that I'm a part of with Mr. Dan Morse. And I echo many of the comments that Dan made earlier from the perspective of a good working relationship, wanting to make things work, of course. But unfortunately, I think we're seeing things just a little differently. So without further ado, I'm here to speak about our opposition to Paine Mountain's proposal to restructure the CVSU board. I'd like to make a couple of quick points. Sorry. First point being, equal representation is legal, common, and appropriate. CVSU's current 3-3 board structure reflects the standard set by 16 V.S.A. subsection 266, providing equal representation to each member district. Because SU board members are appointed and not elected, proportional representation is not required. Many supervisory unions in Vermont include districts of unequal size. CVSU is not unusual. The state board has never used 16 VSA subsection 719C to change board composition. Doing so now would create a destabilizing precedent, inviting similar challenges across the state. With larger statewide governance reforms anticipated, like H454, this is not the time for a disruptive shift. If Paine Mountain's request for a 5-1 structure were to be granted, Echo Valley would be forced to reconsider its membership in CVSU. The current structure has proven fair and functional. The CVSU board has operated collaboratively and effectively under its current structure. Over 90% of the board votes have been unanimous, including the 5-0 vote to hire the current superintendent, with 1 Paine Mountain School District member absent. When Paine Mountain requested broader input, the hiring committee included 10 Paine Mountain representatives out of the 14. The Paine Mountain School District member also chaired the superintendent evaluation process and developed the rubric we now use. The entire board then provided a favorable evaluation. These facts demonstrate that Paine Mountain School District's voice is not diminished under the current model. Equity in governance requires balance, not weighting by size. Governance is about shared responsibility and oversight, not financial contributions. While cost sharing may reflect enrollment, representation must reflect a balance, ensuring both districts, regardless of size, have a meaningful voice. If representation is tied to population, smaller districts across Vermont could be systematically disenfranchised, undermining the very foundation of the supervisory union model. Paine Mountain's proposal would erode or could erode trust and undermine stability. Changing the board structure to 5-1 sends a clear message that large districts can overpower smaller ones, which could lead to mistrust and threatening collaboration. It could create a statewide ripple effect, encouraging more districts to seek control rather than cooperation. I'd like to just make a quick counterpoint on Paine Mountain's reference to the hypothetical scenarios like Lincoln School District. That is, to us, a distraction. It's not grounded in how Central Vermont SU has actually been functioning or is functioning. My conclusion, our conclusion with this, is that Echo Valley respectfully urges the state board to deny Paine Mountain's request to alter the CVSU board from an equal 3-3 representation to a weighted 5-1 structure. The current model is legally sound, widely practiced, and working effectively, and it reflects Vermont's commitment to equity, cooperation, and good governance. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you. I guess my comment for Echo Valley is, I'm trying to think about this through the lens of the SU is there to serve students. And I'm wondering, how does the current structure or a different structure, what effect does that have on the education of students? Because that's really what this is about.
Right, that's a good question. So the way at least I look at this, based on what I do for a living and the boards that I serve, both professionally and as a member of our communities, I look at the SU as kind of a model that's supposed to help serve students, many of which are shared services that are statutorily in some cases required, like special education, transportation, food service, right? Having administration overview for central office, etc., curriculum development, technology, those types of things. The weighting issue here is in governance of those topics. In other words, if Paine Mountain were to have a different opinion or view on how they want to run their district, it has no impact on us, right? If they chose to say, we're not going to provide transportation or food service in this example, that doesn't mean we have to do the same. We could continue to use the SU as that conduit to make that happen, right? So this really comes down to, and I look at what the SU does and what its real purpose is to make sure that we are providing the right statutory services, number one, but number two, we share in some of those costs, right? And we share it proportionally and equitably based on population or enrollment. We've moved back to a shared cost model now that has enrollment. So the point here is we just changed it to enrollment. It was something that was not fair or equitable before. And this rebalance could threaten the fact that we worked so hard in that last year to get that back to, enrollment, which is in the statute. So I hope that answers your question, but that's how we kind of view what the SU's purpose is and what our job is on being a member of the individual school districts, and then how we collaborate at that SU level.
Thank you. And just to be fair, Dan, I realized I did not ask you that question. I'm going to give you a chance for, final comments at the end. And not now, like we'll continue on with Echo Valley, but I will circle back with you on that. Okay. Any other questions from board members?
Yeah, I do have one, and I apologize. I was in the dark for a chunk of time due to some technical issues. And I'm going to apologize by pronouncing Concesi. Is that how you pronounce your name? Which way?
Concesi, but I've been called worse. That's fine. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I assumed Concesi. I just want to say people's name right, respectfully. I do appreciate hearing your perspective around equity and balance in government. And because I was in the dark, I just want to clarify to myself whether you're here as an independent, the person who was trying to ask a question and not here as part of the district. I just wanted to clarify that part before I go further. Are you here on your own, or are you here as a part of a district?
I am. I'm a resident in the town of Orange, which is part of the Echo Valley Community School District, and I happen to sit on the board. And then I was coerced into also joining the Central Vermont SU board in addition to that. So I sit on both boards in the communities that I live and serve.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective. I'm not moving further.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yep.
Thanks, Mohammed. Any other board member questions? Oh, Rich, I see you.
Yeah, so I was just real quick. I was confused. So you work for this SU or a different SU?
I work for a different SU. So Caledonia Central up in the Northeast Kingdom. We work out of the Danville office and we serve 5 school districts and obviously the SU. So I'm up to my eyeballs.
But not this SU?
No, sir.
Okay, no, because I got a little confused on that, so I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I appreciate it.
I apologize for the confusion. I just wonder how much love and time I spend talking about education. Ooh, that's all.
I'm sorry, I cut in front of Tammy.
Yeah, I didn't realize that either, Tammy. I'm sorry. I just saw Rich's hand. Tammy, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I really appreciate Conchesi and Dan, you coming before us and providing your perspectives on this. I have to be honest, I'm having a hard time understanding the argument for why this needs to happen, right? So and I appreciate the equity argument, and there are lots of different ways to think about fairness and distribution, right? And weighted and unweighted, like those kinds of things. But what is the problem we are trying to solve right now? And does that problem need to be solved right now, or can we wait to see sort of how some of this redistricting works out under H 454? I mean, I heard there was sort of a statement saying we shouldn't or couldn't wait, but I'm just sharing that I'm feeling a little uncertain about that argument, and I'm just really having a hard time understanding, like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, other than there's a different perspective on what sort of an equitable allocation of seats on the board would be. But that doesn't seem to me like the strongest argument for why we would be making a major change in governance structure, in June of 2025. And maybe, Dan, maybe you can help me out with that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to, if it's okay with Chair Samuelson.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for the question, and Mike, good to see you. I want the board to know that Mike and I worked a lot together on this question. We tried a lot of different ways to, Chair Samuelson, when you asked for the 2 districts to come up with something that worked for everybody, he and I we were calling each other a lot, and I appreciate the time that Mike put in, and we didn't get there, but we tried, and I appreciate that. Tammy, to answer your question, if it's okay, I'll go back and respond to the question that Jennifer, you asked Mike, which was, how does the SU impact students? So, because I think in some ways that too gets to the question of why we're bringing this request forward. Mike's right that the SU impacts students in, some ways that maybe they don't feel a lot. It's food, special ed, transportation, but the SU also sets policy, right? And then the policy comes down to the districts for adoption, for modification, implementation. And that's a fairly major thing. The fact of the matter is, all of the points that Paine Mountain is making right now about appointing proper voice and appointing a superintendent, about protecting against merging with other districts and getting member representation diluted that way, right? And even about policy, we haven't had actual problems with any of those areas, right? Like the superintendent search went well, and the superintendent is great, objectively speaking, by his evaluations. Lincoln didn't come with us, so that also was not a problem. There has never been policy written at the SU level that Paine Mountain folks object to either. But nevertheless, in principle, all of those problems could be there down the road. The fact that Lincoln did not eventually get paired with CVSU, from Paine Mountain's perspective, the fact that that didn't happen is immaterial because it could have happened. And if it did, I would think Washington and Orange would be worried that the small town of Lincoln as its own district would have 3 members on this board, and then Washington and Orange might just have 1. And that would be a problem. I think that they would recognize too. Similarly with appointing the superintendent, it wasn't actually a problem, but at some point it could be. And if ever again we are appointing another superintendent, the fair thing to do would be not the equitable thing to do, but the proportional thing to do, which is to say these different communities are going to have a voice in that conversation that's in alignment with their size, proportionate. And then thirdly, with policy, it hasn't been a problem, but it could be a problem for the SU to set policy, or even to, honestly, even to debate it. Like if we think about the debates that are happening about school policy nationwide with regard to LGBTQ people, people of color, trans people and sports, like to have a proportionate SU structure would be to set the culture for those policy conversations in alignment with the values and the vision of the communities, right? And so Paine Mountain is concerned that at some point down the road, it might happen that we have a conversation about SU policy regarding trans athletes, for example, that really is bad for the culture in our schools, and not reflective of the values of the people in our community. And to be more proportionate would be to ensure that those conversations are reflective of the values of the people in our communities. And I hope that makes sense. Hasn't happened yet, but it's something that people in Paine Mountain think about.
Just as a follow-up, so I hear you, Dan, right? And I think that's always one of those tensions with supervisory union structure. Like that's an inherent tension in the system generally, right? And you are not alone in that tension, right? Like this is not just you. I think my concern is that, as of Monday night, the legislature has signaled that there's going to be a sort of a strategic process led by a different organization that is going to look at sort of how we sort of organize governance in this state. And it seems like we would be preempting that process by making a decision now, unless there was a major emergency. Like, I'm just not seeing, I hear your argument. I think it's a tension. And I'm not invalidating that tension, right? But at the same time, what I also see is that there's going to be the very thoughtful effort that's going to be sort of starting here very soon, that's going to look at sort of governance writ large. And this entire situation could be 52 pickup, right? Like, sure. We don't know how things are going to look in December. And I think it would, just from my opinion, it seems like that the state board would be sort of preempting that process by making that decision now, unless there was an immediate problem that needed to be solved. And I understand that I understand there could be some future things. I hear you on all those things, and I share those concerns. Like those are challenges we have with sort of governance structures in Vermont in general. But I don't know that that's a question, but I want you to give you a sense of sort of where I'm sitting on this. And it's not that I don't think that the things that you're saying are important and shouldn't be under consideration, but I also, we have to operate within the larger policy structures and statute that the legislature has put out there. And on Monday night, they were pretty clear that there's going to be a very concerted effort, and it's going to happen pretty quickly. And it seems to me like the state board's not in a position to step in to this situation right now. because there's going to be this other process. So I hear you. And I think these are all things that need to be sort of brought into that conversation to the commission, right, on public education and sort of how we think about this split in governance between SUs and localities, and also to the larger group that's going to be making decisions around sort of what district consolidation might look like. So just sharing my thoughts, but also wanting I'm hearing what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
like,
thank you.
I think it's not that what you're saying is unimportant. I'm just thinking that there's going to be a different process that's embarked upon here pretty quickly that's going to address some of this.
I totally appreciate that. Thank you for that. And if I might just respond, I think we really will see some changes in governance structures for education soon, but they won't be implemented until July 28 is what I heard the secretary say, I believe. And that's still 3 years away. And I think if the state board did vote now or at the next meeting to say CVSU, and I read the green paper, I thought the green paper was thoughtful. And frankly, I own the fact that I didn't count the high school students, and that was just an error on my part. And if the secretary's recommendation is to go to a 4-2 structure. If the State Board of Ed voted to do that today or at the next meeting, it could also be sending a signal to legislators that what we want for a governance structure is more proportionality. Because what I would call this, the current one, just kind of flat equality. I don't think it's equity either. And I also don't think that
we call it horizontal equity. There's vertical equity and horizontal. Vertical equity is the weighting, and then horizontal equity is everybody a 1-to-1. So flat horizontal.
I see that, but I also think for the board and for the legislators, one of the important questions to ask is equity always the most important principle, and what does equity actually mean and require and look like? And I'm not sure that equity is always the most important principle, right? But those are larger questions. I guess I just think the State Board of Ed could have a vote to make CVSU go to a 4-2 structure now for good reasons, and it wouldn't necessarily be wasted work given what's about to happen at the legislative level.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate your thoughts.
Brian, I'll turn to you.
Thanks. This is a question really, I think, for Secretary Saunders and Ms. Simmons. Are we, once the governor signs this bill, which I believe the education bill, which all signs are pointing to him doing, are we then not allowed to make this change? In other words, I'm trying to see if we're under any time constraint or pressure, or if we do have a little bit of time that it doesn't have to happen at this meeting. And I know there's some rules around doing things after bills become law, but I'm not sure if it applies in this situation.
Sure. So your authority in 16 V.S.A. 719 isn't amended by the pending legislation. And so as a purely formal legal and statutory question, no, you are not looking at a deadline or a change that is upcoming.
Okay. Thanks.
Other board members? Questions, comments, doesn't have to be directed to our representatives, but it could be just furthering the board discussion. Rich, I see your hand is up.
So I have a lot of respect for Tammy, and I think she's always been very given some good points, but I think I feel kind of the opposite on this, and I think that it's too late for these folks to come to us if at the next meeting they decide to say, hey, we really support whatever the legislature's doing. We're going to move that as a supervisory union, or maybe they decide as a supervisory union they don't like it and they want to challenge it, or they want to bring legal action against it, and they won't have the ability to do that, so it could weigh against it. So I don't agree. I think maybe we're almost on the same page on where we'd like to go, but I do think that it's important. They did bring it to us. They tried to take care of it amongst themselves. They aren't able to, and their remedy is to come to us. And how do we know? I mean, we don't know. I've seen lots of legislation get passed that, has never really come to fruition, or it's going to be totally different. If you think about what was originally presented by the different groups and what we wound up with, who knows what is going to change. And then we're also coming into an election cycle that could, before any of this goes into effect, could be changed too. So I would not like to not just say that we're not going to do it because there's legislation is going to be signed and approved. I would much rather just do it, make a decision based on that, we still have a few years left, and we should give them, they came to us with a request, and I'd really like to act on it. I don't believe I want to act on it today. If we're not going to allow public comment, I think we should, on a change like this, allow for, people to weigh in, and maybe nobody will weigh in. Maybe it's just one person, but I definitely would like to move forward. And I would even, I really appreciate what Emily did for us. I think the recommendations, I don't know if the recommendations are Emily's or the secretary's, but I think they gave us some good options to discuss. And I'd like to, if it would be appropriate, I'd like to ask both of them. There was 2 recommendations, one to go to a 4-2 and one to go to a 8 members with 5 and 3, or to not do anything. And I'd like to, if it would be appropriate, to ask both of them, just give us a 2-minute Reader's Digest version of what their thoughts are.
Sure. And let me just forecast too, board members from whom I've not, or, that haven't spoken yet, I would love to hear your thoughts as well. So I'll circle back with other board members, but Emily, you look like you were poised and ready with the response.
Sure, it's the secretary's recommendation, but I did do the staff work to prepare that for Zoe's consideration. So the request for composition from Paine Mountain was for 5-1. And in thinking about the real work around a board table and the adults who have those conversations and participate in those important decisions, it seemed not maybe the most productive and collaborative collection of folks to have around the table. I will tell you, I put myself in the position, thought about what if I was the one and only from Echo Valley, and thought it would be beneficial to at least have that person have a partner in that work to represent Echo Valley's membership on the SU board. So I'm thinking of how to tee that up for your consideration. We phrased our recommendation as reflecting the disproportionate size of the 2 districts with a model that gives greater representation to Paine Mountain, but that we recommend you choose to give no fewer than 2 seats to Echo Valley to allow, a partner in that work around the board table.
We did have conversations around the overall size of the board, so working within the existing membership versus expanding. Wanted just to put forward those different options on the table. All of this was intended to support proportional representation, but also to ensure that there's a level of collaboration across these districts, and ensuring that Echo Valley also had that representation from another community member to engage in a thoughtful dialogue and conversation with the board writ large.
And Zoe, you jogged my memory a little bit. I'll also point out that the 2 member boards are, pretty big. And so there are other board members to draw from so if the respective boards were to sit down and elect additional members to the SU board, they do have folks.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I mean, we did that at Wyndham Central, and we came up with, a way to do it so that there was good representation and stuff. So Chair Samuelson, could we just get a 2-minute from if we were like, if they only had a choice of one or the other, which one they both prefer, could we hear that?
Well, and keep in mind, like, that is the secretary's recommendation, but I mean, there are an infinite number of options here. I don't think we need to constrain them to just those two.
Okay, well, good. It seemed like these made kind of sense, and I liked them. I actually have one I like better than the other, and I do appreciate the explanation.
I mean, we could literally do nothing. We could add 1 member, we could add 2 members, we could add 3 members, we could give each member a weighted vote. And like, we really have a lot of options at our disposal. Let me turn to people that I've not heard from yet. Caleb and Mohammed, I know I did hear from you, but I would love to sort of know how you're thinking about the question at hand. And then Lyle, I'd love to hear from you too. So let me start with Caleb.
Okay, so I'm just like articulating the whole thing, so let me make sure I have everything wrapped around correctly in my brain. So the district or the area that has roughly 4 times as many people has only 1 seat.
Well, no, if I may, each school district has 3 members from the school district that sit on the SU board. And I think the discussion that was raised is that Washington is the most populous town within Paine Mountain, and they only have 1 person. Dan,
Northfield.
I'm sorry, Northfield.
Northfield has almost 6,000 residents, and Northfield, at the time of the superintendent hire, had only 1 board member on the SU. Northfield and Williamstown together are Paine Mountain. Orange and Washington together are Echo Valley.
Okay,
so
thank you.
By population, Northfield has significantly more people than any other town within the SU.
Yeah. Northfield outnumbers the 3 other towns put together.
Okay, but they were one of the 6 SU board members. Correct? Does that make sense, Caleb?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it's relatively clear. I would lean with Richard, honestly. I mean, I think if it's that much of a difference, I mean, if it was a minimal difference and it wasn't that substantial, I don't think I would lean quite that way, especially in the situation we're in with the imminent changes and everything. But with that substantial of a difference, I think there should definitely be more representation. But that's, I think, my opinion personally.
Thank you. Mohammed?
You all know Mohammed is all about equity. I appreciated listening to Daniel's perspective about it, to Conjesi as well. But given the circumstances and where we are around our redistricting and school changes, reform, I do not think this is the right moment to make any changes in this regard. Although I understand that we do have the legality to vote on this already, but I just feel like I feel like we have not heard from many other constituents or voices. Really, for me to go for A or B, and what happens next after we vote for today, I don't want to put into. I feel like we should not be urged to take action today around this. I need to learn more from other perspectives. Not that I don't trust Daniel or Conjesi's opinions.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Let me do Lyle and then Brian and then Gray.
Thank you. They've been together for a while, since 2018. I'm struggling a little bit with what's the urgency. And I haven't heard that there's a problem, and maybe that's because Mike and Dan get along really well and everything's good because of them. And that can happen. Now, hopefully they'll continue to be on their respective school boards. So I guess what I don't want us to do is to unintentionally create disruption. If we change something that's working, will it create disruption somehow? Now, that said, if we have to make a change or we decide we're going to, I kind of like the 5-3, but because it is a little more proportional. But again, I don't even know if we want to do that if it's working.
Thanks, Lyle. Brian?
Thanks. I appreciate everything that everyone has said. I don't want to make the decision today, but I don't think we should make the decision based on the pending legislation. I don't remember who made the point, but you know, we don't know where that's going to go. And even if it does move forward as planned, we're still talking a few years out. I am inclined to give greater representation. I think Richard and Caleb both make good points. But again, just glad we don't have to make that decision today. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Gray?
Yeah, I agree with everything Brian just said about not making the decision based off of changes with legislation, because and even if everything happens, we're talking about 2028. You know, 3 years. That's a good amount of time. So I don't know why we would put off. You know, why we would avoid making that decision for that reason. So I think we should act as if it's, you know, we're talking about a rule that's going to stay in place indefinitely because we don't know what's going to happen. I also don't think that we should avoid changing things just because there's not currently an issue, you know, because something could happen, something might not happen. It seems like the board gets along great, and that's great, but something could come up where there's a disagreement, and I think it's important that we have representation before it happens. I wouldn't feel better about it if 2 years down the line there is a problem where people feel underrepresented in a major issue, and then we go back to this and go, well, okay, now we'll fix things. I think we should just make sure that things are as equitable as possible now. And then in terms of actual board layout, I will say that I think it should be changed. I don't think that there should be even representation if it's 80-20 as a population difference. That just seems like a lot, and that does seem like the majority there is being pretty clearly underrepresented. Although I'll also say that there are benefits to overrepresenting the minority, even if just not in as extreme a way as it is now. You know, if you really had that 5-to-1 ratio, I think that's very tricky because, you know, you always have people that have the similar values and similar issues that they're going to prioritize because they're from the same place. Even if there are more of them, their opinions will always be prioritized over that one person from Echo Valley, and I just think that's pretty tough. So I would lean towards there being a majority of people as on one side, unlike now, but I don't think it should be so extreme. And also the 5-1 ratio wouldn't actually make sense if the population difference is 80-20, right? Because then that would be 4-2 anyway. So I definitely don't think we can go with that option. I've heard 5-8, that seems good, or even like 6-8 seems like a good number. You know, because I do think there's a large population difference there, but yeah, any of those other solutions seem good. I do think we should change it, but not to 5-1.
Thanks, Gray. I think your hand is raised, and then I'm maybe share my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Just a very quick comment. You know, nothing has gone wrong, which is great, right? And I think someone brought up, maybe it was Gray, that brought up that something could go wrong, and that's, you know, what we're trying to get our heads wrapped around in changing the actual board formation. You know, one of the things that our district fears is that we work so hard to change the cost sharing, the way the SU shares costs from a funding model that was not in best interest of Echo Valley, that wasn't fair or equitable, to something that the statute supports, which is enrollment. If we were to, so I want you guys to imagine this is like hundreds of thousands of dollars each year were being absorbed unnecessarily. And I won't bore the board with the details unless they want to know. But when we moved to an enrollment model, it better represented the students being served. And it's more fair and it's more equitable. If we would have changed this composition on the board, what is to prevent the model to go back to the previous, or to one that's not in the best interest or doesn't follow the statute, which says in the absence of a decision, SUs will share costs on an enrollment basis. So a vote could easily happen after the formation of this that would basically eradicate all the hard work that the SU board did for about a year to get that right. So I just wanted to throw that out. And again, I can't emphasize enough, you know, the way CVSU is comprised, it's not unusual. It's been following what the statute has, V.S.A. 16719, and many boards are comprised in that manner. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm hearing from board members, there seems to be a general consensus of not reaching a decision today. What I would propose is, Dan, I'm going to give you some homework because I asked about whether there are other SUs that have other than sort of this default representation. So I invite you to see what you can find and bring back to the board. I think what also feels important to me is that there is an opportunity for members of the public from CVSU, whether that's Echo Valley or Paine Mountain, if they want to appear before the board and share their thoughts. I think what I would suggest is that each, you know, whether it comes from the supervisory union or each underlying school district, I would invite you to send an email out to your constituents. And I think I would ask people to register with Maureen and Suzanne at the State Board of Ed. Their intention to speak during public comment will give people 2 minutes. And what I'm going to do is our next meeting is July.
Thank you.
Hang on just a second. Go to my calendar. Our next meeting is July 16th. I'm going to take the number of people who notify the board by, let me say July 8th. So we'll get through the 4th of July holiday. July 8th, people need to notify Maureen and Suzanne of their intention to speak during public comment, and that will allow us to set the agenda for this item accordingly, because maybe it's one person, maybe it's 2 people, maybe it's 20 people, but I would ask people to get back to Maureen and Suzanne by July 8th with their intention to speak, and we can have an extended public comment session on this. And my final thought is just reflecting on the supervisory union of which my town is a member. When they were merged post Act 46, they embraced the motto, all our kids are all our kids. And when they, you know, each, there are underlying school districts, and the school districts focus on their students. But when it gets to the SU level, the focus is really on the SU, and the idea that it doesn't matter what town or what school district a child comes from, the focus is on all of the children. And I reflect a little bit on what Lyle says about if something is working, I worry a little bit about disrupting that. And I hope that, you know, the fact that things have been going along well is heartening to me. What I don't want is for this to sort of break down into school district lines or town lines, because I really do think for an SU to be functional, you really need to have a focus that's at a higher level. It's not at the student level, it's not at the school level, it's not at the town level or the school district. You really should be thinking about the SU. So I would just encourage the parties to really be thinking about things through that lens. Tammy, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I would be curious and also having them weigh in on the secretary's proposal. I mean, I think general counsel, you know, Simmons put a lot of thought into that and making her recommendations. And so
At our request.
yeah, it seems like a starting point for the board to consider, right? The green sheet. So I would be really interested in having both parties, that if we were going to make a decision to do something, I would be really interested in knowing sort of, does one of those two, are both those options totally offensive, or just one, or both options just acceptable, or is one better or worse, and what their logic would be? Because I would really like to have them the opportunity to weigh in on those recommendations as a part of our discussion. And if they have a different recommendation, I'd like to hear that too. But I think specifically with respect to the secretary's recommendation, since I think that was a pretty thoughtful recommendation, would be helpful to have their input on that.
Thanks, Tammy. Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on that, I also think the green paper was very thoughtful and well done and illuminating. I'm wondering if the board is looking for members of the public to weigh in on the different options offered by the green paper, or just board members?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I'm not really sure in what capacity Rama is here.
Yeah, I mean, so I heard Chair Samuelson, I heard you say if people want to speak at the July 16 meeting, they should register their intention to speak with Maureen and Suzanne. I take it those would probably be members of the public from our communities.
That is what I was thinking.
Okay. So then I guess my question is, how do they get in touch with Maureen and Suzanne? And B, does the board want them to say specifically, we would prefer model X or Y?
If they can't attend the meeting, I think that would be helpful. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, because we don't want to just prioritize only people who are able to show up at our meeting. I think it would be helpful. And I do realize I might be inviting a massive email campaign. But I do think it's important to understand, beyond, the people who are at today's meeting, if there is general consensus behind this plan or not, by the people who will be most affected by this. So I think that would be helpful. And I think if people are able to attend to our meeting, and we can do it via Zoom, that would be great, but they are also able to email, and I think that would be entirely appropriate, and the board will consider and read everything that's sent to us. So Maureen and Suzanne's emails, and we can put this in the minutes, but Suzanne is Suzanne, SUZANNE .Sprague, SPRAGUE @vermont.gov. And Maureen is Maureen, MAUREEN .Gaidis, GAIDYS @vermont.gov. And you should send it to both of them. And they'll make sure that it gets to the board. Rich, Lyle, and then we're going to wrap this up for today.
Sure. And I'm sorry, I read through this because I was really interested in this, and the packet was kind of thick in paper. But the other thing is, maybe too, as part of at our next meeting, they can, both sides or both groups, or the representative both, can kind of just go over, what their kind of like their final proposal had been, and why the other side didn't like it, and what the other side's final, just to get a real feel from them too. Because as somebody was saying, I mean, maybe we say that they have 50 members, and we'll give them a board that's not going to work. But I just like to, and I've read a lot of this, but I was having trouble really following the specifics. So if we could get that, that'd be really cool. I think it'd be really helpful to me anyways.
Thanks. Lyle?
Just wonder, maybe you said it and I didn't hear it. I wonder if we should make sure the public knows they have X number of minutes each to speak, just to set that parameter.
I think I did say that, but that's a good reminder. Maximum of 2 minutes, and the emails, don't have to be voluminous. That reminds me too, just going through the experience from a couple of months ago where I think I had over 700 emails that were, well, all board members did, but I did respond to all of them. I'm just going to say now, board members will read every email that comes our way. I am not going to individually respond to every email. We are going to take that up at the meeting, and I'm going to, keep my sanity on this. Zoe.
I just wanted to thank Dan and Mike for their thoughtful engagement in this conversation, and also that I think it's helpful for the board to continue reflecting and engaging in a further conversation. I think the outcome will be really helpful in terms of informing the districting task force. So in addition to providing, direction for this particular request, I think a real thoughtful engagement around this will be helpful because it can inform the work of the districting committees and bringing into play all the different considerations that should be factored when evaluating these type of requests or, a future proposal for larger districts. So I just appreciate the conversation. And as an agency, we stand ready to support if there's any additional data or information we can bring forward to be helpful for the conversation. We are here to do that.
Thanks, Zoe. And I do appreciate both Dan and Mike, and frankly, Zoe and Emily, the various people who have come together, and board members for having a thoughtful conversation. I think it's clear that there's not an obvious answer here. I think that's what you're hearing, that board members are really, trying to find a way through that makes sense, that's thoughtful and respectful. And we want to continue the thoughtful and respectful relationship that you guys have had with each other. So I think this has been a really germane conversation that we've had. I look forward to receiving more information, and we will continue the conversation at our next meeting. Thank you all. All right. So we're now at the tail end of our meeting, future meeting planning. As I mentioned, next meeting is July 16th. I think considering this discussion with Paine Mountain, it is probably easiest to continue to keep July virtual. So we can plan on an 8:30 start time. We'll be virtual, and we will have public comment on the supervisory union composition that's really tailored to the number of participants who wish to speak during that extended public comment period. Beyond that, let me look at my handy list. I anticipate that we will have a commission update, secretary update, more independent schools that will be up for reapproval. We should reach out to the Special Education Advisory Panel because they will be due for an update, and see if that works with Katie Ballard's schedule. And then I anticipate too that we will have an extended conversation about planning out our work going forward. Again, I don't anticipate that we will have council on board by July, and frankly, probably not even by August, but I think we should start talking about how the board is going to approach the work that's been assigned to us by statute. Maybe standing up committees that will be responsive to the work that's been assigned to us, and really thinking through how to approach this. So in the meantime, I think it would be helpful if we all take some time to read through H454. I believe I did send that in an email, so you should have a link to it, and then be ready to really think through it together at our next meeting. Oh, and we should have a new student board member to fill Gray's shoes. Anything else? Lyle, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, just a question for Deb, maybe. I think we have 2 independent schools subcommittee meetings before the next board meeting. How much time should we suggest to Jennifer will need to be on the agenda? Because I think that might be 6 schools, perhaps.
That's a great question, and we've been having some pre-planning around that. We did meet with Tom in anticipation of trying to move forward these approvals as quickly as possible. So we expect our first committee meeting to be just an hour, and then our hope is to be able to move forward and having others ready to review. A dozen is what we're hoping for within one meeting. I will say that that is contingent on the schools doing their response as well. They actually have a 30-day window, but many of them have been more responsive to that. So it's right now a little bit hard for us to predict, but we do have that schedule laid out in the hopes that we'll be able to bring forward, a dozen or so each time. So we'll have a better read on that after, I think, the second committee meeting that we have scheduled, and we can relay our recommendations around time. Deb, anything else you wanted to add to that? Did I?
No, I think the unknown is just with the schools so busy in the summer with extended years services and other things, how quickly they'll provide a response to their renewal reports. I think that, in my mind, is the only thing that is hard to predict. Our work is pretty buttoned up on this end of things, but.
Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, so once the schools receive the report, they have 30 days to respond to it, but they could respond to it within a week. And then once they respond to it, then it's ready to advance to our 2200 approvals committee. If they take the full 30 days, then they would wait until the next available committee meeting before they would appear.
That's right. I think none of the schools have ever taken 30 days. I think the most since 2019 has been like 3 days. but it was better timing in terms of, the transition from a full school year to extended year services for the summer weeks. So, it might be a little bit longer, it might not be longer. It's really hard to predict.
I just want to thank Deb because she's been really involved with the schools, and encouraging them to be able to be as responsive as they can. So, we're trying to shepherd the process along, but we do want to be mindful that there are some unknowns that are hard for us to anticipate at this point. We're moving forward with the path that we will, an assumption that we'll receive responses in a more timely manner than the full 30 days, but they do have that available to them should they need that time.
Well, and I appreciate in advance the board's patience with this because we may have, I'm just making this up, Deb, 8 different schools that come. So if you have specific questions, like Tammy may have a specific question, which was a great question. If we can know that in advance, that these are this is what I'm really looking for, that might help us usher through the schools as quickly and appropriately as possible.
Right.
Yeah, thanks, Lyle. Anything else for the agenda? I will forecast, I think we're going to be busy these next few months. So,
in it together.
That's right, in partnership. Okay, if there's nothing further, I will open up public to be heard. Ram, I see your hand is raised and thank you for your patience.
Yes, so this is regarding the Paine Mountain School District proposal. And I don't know where to start because I heard some things today that were very disturbing, in particular the one referring to the town of Northfield and their representation. Act 46 of 2015 required that we give up town identity in favor of a larger school district. That's why we don't have the Williamstown School District anymore or the Northfield School District. That was part of the law that we had to merge like that. I also would like to say that supervisory unions are about the students, very much so. As a matter of fact, supervisory unions are not about the districts as much as they are about the schools and the individual students. And that's an important point. So let me just run through some quick bona fides here. That I was a member of the now defunct Williamstown School District Board and the now defunct Orange North Supervisory Union Board, and I served as chair at times on both of those. Co-chaired the Williamstown Northfield Merger Study Committee that presented the merger plan to both communities. That plan received overwhelming support from both towns, 85% favorable in Northfield, 71% favorable in Williamstown. I was on the PMSD board from its formation in 2018.
May I
and
just
I was
interrupt for 1 second? I'm really sorry to do this to you. I'm just looking at the time because we are slightly off schedule, and I know that Gray has a firm jump off at 12:15. So I'm going to have to like shift hats for a second. Gray is our student member who's stepping off the board, and I know, Gray, that you need to go and that this is probably going to run past the time that you're available to be with us. So I just wanted to make sure that we properly thanked you for your service. It's really been a pleasure having you on the board, and we really wish you well and hope that you will keep in touch with us and let us know what you're doing.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I do have to go. Sorry to interrupt things. But yeah, bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Sorry for that interlude, but thank you.
So beyond membership on the Williamstown School District Board and the Orange North Supervisory Board, I was the co-chair of the Williamstown Northfield Merger Study Committee that had overwhelming support from both towns. I was on the Paine Mountain School District Board from its formation into 2019 when I had to resign due to personal reasons, but I remained on the Supervisory Union District Staff Negotiating Team as CVSU representative for another year beyond that. I strongly oppose the proposal as put forth by the Paine Mountain Board and the recommendation of the Secretary. Supervisory unions were purposely designed to be responsive to the needs of individual students and schools instead of individual districts. The rationale behind this approach is simple. SUs manage shared resources that are both legally and locally defined. The size of one or another district was not meant to affect the right of the individual student in smaller schools to have equitable and equal access to these services. I had a bit about the problems as defined by the Paine Mountain Board, and it all comes down to something could happen. But I would also point out that the worst of this decision-making could happen, and Paine Mountain could turn around and just start ramrodding issues down Echo Valley's throats. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I won't read my whole statement. I'll take advantage of a later opportunity to present it to you.
And you are able to submit that, and it will be included as a link in our minutes.
I will, but I urge you to take a look at the Grand Isle Supervisory Union if you don't believe imbalance on these SU boards can create problems. This isn't a could or a may. This is a has created problems. So these issues, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between school districts and supervisory unions. And that's what's coming up to the forefront is there's been too much of an attempt to meld these separate organizations into one. And that when that occurs, you have a supervisory district. But that's not what we have here in the CVSU. We have two districts that formed through a side-by-side merger, and Orange and Washington voluntarily entered into that process with Williamstown and Northfield because of the positive equal representation on the SU board experience that was shared among Orange, Washington, and Williamstown. Northfield had a different setup in their Washington South Supervisory Union when it was just them and Roxbury. And I think it's notable that Roxbury chose to go with Montpelier and not Northfield when it came time to talk about mergers. I don't think all of that is accidental. So please explore these other SUs and in particular Grand Isle to see what has gone wrong and the problems that an imbalance on the board has created. So with that, I'll just say thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to be heard? All right. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Words were out of my mouth. Is there a second? Tammy, you look like I see second coming out of your mouth. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed, please say nay.
Mohammed said aye.
All right, we stand
Thank you,
adjourned. Thank
everybody.
you all. Have a great afternoon.